Hello, can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you... Over. We are sinking. We are sinking.
Hello? This is the German Coast Guard.
We are sinking. We're sinking.
What are you thinking about?
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everybody. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you're doing it with, however great it feels, how many times you're going to, I don't care. I'm just glad you're doing it here with me. Legal Vices on this little old channel that I call Legal Vices, but now we are officially on Maritime Monday. We've been on Maritime 2 weeks. Now we're on Maritime Monday today, and tomorrow will be the final day of the Coast Guard hearings. We're going to do the morning of day 9 today, and then tomorrow we will do the afternoon of day 9. So that's and then we'll wrap up. Then we will be done with the Titan Submersible until they release their final report. When will the final report be issued? I know they're going to try to expedite it, but they also have to do quite an extensive amount of additional investigations. This was just the public hearing part of it. They've done a lot before. They did the public hearings. They're going to do a lot more. Then they've got to actually draft the report with all of the recommendations they're going to make. Then that has to be signed off up through the chain of command. This is just me pulling numbers out of my hat. I'm thinking it's going to be at least close to a year or more before we see the answer, before we see that final report. So we'll have to see how long it actually takes, but I'm guessing it'll take about that long. But as I said, it's not up to me. I have no say in the matter. It's entirely up to them. But I don't really have a lot else to talk about. We're just winding down. I think all of the crazy has gone. That's the one thing I'm glad about. I think crazy has left the building finally. So we can just coast into home here. We can just kind of take it easy for the rest of the day, perhaps. And tomorrow, we have the first witness. I have no idea who he is. He wasn't on the witness list that I have, and I haven't downloaded the most recent witness list, so we'll just have to find out who he is together. But before we get going, we've got 178 people here right now, 181 now, and 68 likes before we even get into the Coast Guard video. But only 68 of you have hit the like button. Let's just do it now while I'm doing the housekeeping stuff. We need 110 of you to get down there and hit that like button. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so. We did some damage to the numbers over the weekend. We'd had our F at Friday stream on Friday, and Saturday was a 6-hour Lego stream, and quite a few people said, what? I think we lost like 15, 18 people said, what is this? And then they said, at least that's what I'm thinking. Either that or YouTube did its normal thing. But anyway, we're down a few from last week. So if you have subscribed, just double check to make sure you are. And if you haven't subscribed, I would be very, very pleased and very, very happy if you would do me the pleasure, do me the honor of subscribing to the channel. And with that, I think we're ready to get going. Sonny or Chris has kicked us off even before we went live with 10 Legal Vices memberships, which gets a foghorn right out of the gate. Thank you so much. If you are one of the 10 people that got a Legal Vices membership right out of the gate, which was Gayla Bird, Mamasaurus Rex, Flux got one, Nancy Marcho, Oishin, Insidious Bliss, Jessica Hogue, Crocheting Bat, Britt Ketchell, and Sailhound. If you are one of those people, you got a Legal Vices gifted membership. We had our members only stream on Sunday. Now you can go back and watch it and all the other ones we've done. But stay tuned. There always will be more. So thank you very much, Sonia and Chris, for kicking us off. I believe this is day 24 we're shooting for the Emotional Support Potato Pig Dog Cam achievement. Let's see if we can get to day 24. Let's see. That is all. So I will put up today's like and subscribe poll once the hearings begin. Once I push play, and we'll take it from there. I'm kind of sad. These Coast Guard hearings are coming to an end, but I'm also happy because I get to wear a different hat. Get to take this hat off. I've been wearing it for 2 weeks straight. Okay, here we are. Now, the audio of this is always jacked up. So I'm going to boost. I'm going to try to boost them 600%, as we always do. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I could be very, very shouty. I don't know, but let's see how it goes. We've just gotta play it by ear. There's no way around the terrible Coast Guard audio problem. It's clear. It's just they're always very, very quiet, and there's only so much I can do to balance it out. And the one last Friday was just a disaster.
We will begin the day with testimony from Mr. Matthew McCoy, a former operations technician for OceanGate. Sir, the board's recorder, Lieutenant Steele, will now administer.
Are we hearing from Dr. McCoy? Is Dr. McCoy our first witness?
The day with testimony from Mr. Matthew McCoy.
All right, I have to put up our banner. And how are we on the audio balance? On a scale from 1 to 10, how much louder am I than the audio here? See, I'm doing the day 9. Oh, wow, the balance is quite good for a change, it seems. Wow, that's that's a shocker. All right, day 10 morning is Mr. Matthew McCoy. And who is Mr. Matthew McCoy, I wonder?
A former operations technician for OceanGate.
Okay, let me add that to our banner. I'm former operations manager, operations technician for OceanGate. Please let this guy have a PhD. Please let this guy have a PhD. Because this is how we're putting him up here right now. Day 9 morning, Mr. Matthew McCoy. If this dude has a PhD, it's getting changed to Dr. McCoy instantly. So I hope he is a doctor. Please be a doctor.
Sir, the board's recorder, Lieutenant Steele, will now administer your oath.
Good morning. Please stand and raise your right hand. A false statement given to an agency of the United States is punishable by fine and/or imprisonment under 18 U.S.C. 1001. Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony that you're about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth?
That man is former military. That man right there is former military. I don't know who he is or what he did, but the way he is standing and swearing in, guaranteed 100% that man is former military. Forget the haircut. That's kind of a giveaway as well, but that is the stance of a former military person right there.
Nothing but the truth, so help you God. Thank you. You may be seated.
Good morning, Mr. McCoy.
Good morning.
Thank you for making the trip today, despite the weather conditions. We appreciate it. As we start out, I'd like to start with you providing your work history and background that would be applicable to your testimony today, sir.
My work history starts out, I was an active duty member of the U.S. Coast Guard from
Told you.
2015 to 2015.
There you go.
In that time period, I was I started out on the Coast Guard Cutter Spar, Kodiak Glass.
13 years with the Coast Guard. Called it.
I was stationed on board the Coast Guard Cutter Eagle for 3.5 years, part of the auxiliary division, 2004 to 2007. In 2007 to 2010, I was stationed at Coast Guard Station Kauai, where I became a boarding officer, and I served for a short time as the law enforcement pay officer for the station. And then from there, I went to I was stationed up in Washington State at the Maritime Force Protection Unit Bangor from 2010 to 2012, where we conducted force protection security zone escorts for the submarine, the naval submarine station there. And then after that, I went to the Coast Guard Cutter Monroe in Kodiak, Alaska, and I was a member of the propulsion division from 2012 to 2015. And then at that point in time, I went into the LF active duty, and I went into the Coast Guard Reserve. From there, I moved to Oregon, and I worked a couple different jobs. I worked for Mutual Materials as a shift lead at their production facility while I was taking some college classes down there. Ended up taking a job and moving back to Spokane, which is where I grew up, and worked for a company called Bayfir Solutions. I believe that they've been consolidated with another company, and did a remote contract technical writing, developing maintenance procedure cards for the Coast Guard for the small boat product line. And then moved from there with my fiance to Kenmore, Washington, and started taking classes there at one of the local community colleges. While I was doing that, that was the beginning of 2017. I was doing that. I saw a job posting for the operations technician with OceanGate. Sounded kind of interesting, so I inquired and ended up taking the job in after that spring term, or so that was in April of 2017.
Okay, and I'm going to stop you there for a second, sir. Before we get into your time at OceanGate, can you provide some more background on your Coast Guard duties, specifically?
And I'm going to
with regard
stop
the
both
flight
of you
officer,
there
duties you had
because
mentioned?
chat seems to be in disagreement. We have lots of people saying the audio balance is perfect. We have a lot of people saying I'm super hot. I know I'm super hot, but I think you're talking about the mics. I'm listening. It sounds good. So there is a lot of YouTube does a lot of things depending on what you're listening on. Like on my phone, it sounds absolutely just fine. Don't know. See, we got right there. Audio is fine, and you're super loud. So it's something we'll all just have to work out for ourselves. Can't please everybody, I'm afraid, especially with YouTube. It's always nice when you don't have to mess with the volume, but you know the Coast Guard isn't doing us any favors by not giving us any volume whatsoever. So yep, see, you can just go straight through here. Jeff is loud. It's fine. You're very loud. So, you know, it is what it is. It's great for some. It's not great for others. As Zach says, everything is terrible. There you go. So schizophrenics, it's schizophrenic chat love, right? And you shouldn't be able to, if I'm talking over them, you shouldn't be able to hear them because I want you to hear what I'm saying over what they're saying. That's it should be a titch louder than they are. But anyway, let's go.
Right. So I went to boarding officer school in 2009, and before that, I was a boarding team member out in Kauai. One of the things that we dealt with in Kauai specifically a lot was not recreational, but passenger vessels for hire. There's a large number of tour boats that operate on the island. So we had a lot of those vessels operating. Most of them were inspected. Sometime around 2009, 2010, the Coast Guard placed a marine inspector over on Kauai full time. Before that, they were operating out of the Honolulu office, and he would come over and do his inspections. So he was co-located at our building there, and we were able to work with him. It was actually pretty useful having a marine inspector on site because he knew all the vessels. There's a lot of people operating outside of their the specified areas on their COIs. So he started we were being directed to actually board certified passenger vessels, which is not very common at a station level to be going out and doing enforcement actions on them. Also had the opportunity to board and terminate a couple voyages of people that were operating basically beyond a six-pack. So they were carrying more than 6 passengers for hire, and it became very clear that they were trying to specifically circumvent the rules. We had one case where a gentleman had a 100-ton license, but his vessel wasn't inspected. And what he had set up with some of the local not Airbnbs, but the condos that people would come out and rent is that he was receiving compensation directly from the condos, and people were getting these tours as part of their rental fees. So it was included in an entire package, but he was still receiving compensation for it. I know that was passed over, I think, to the sector, and they ended up, I don't know what exactly happened. I believe administratively, he ended up losing his 100-ton license out of that process. So I'd had some experience dealing with both passenger vessels as well as people trying to circumvent the rules regarding operating for hire.
Thank you, sir. And just want to know, you're speaking a little fast. I want to make sure for the record that we get the your transcript right.
Okay.
And also, if you need a break at any time, just let me know.
Will do.
I want to go back to your time at MST Kauai or Station Kauai.
I was at the station, yes.
Right. And you said you met with the Marine inspector from Sector Honolulu.
Yeah, so they had the sector created a billet over there, and I believe that it was established as a Marine Safety Detachment. It was a single inspector. There was because he just focused on doing the COIs for all of the tour boats that were operating on the island, and he got to the point where he was spending enough time on island every month that they justified it. So it was, I believe, it was actually established as Marine Safety Detachment Kauai, but I'm not sure.
Do you remember what year that was, sir?
Probably 2008.
Do you remember the name of the inspector?
Not off the top of my head.
Could it have been, for your memory, Chief Warrant Officer Dennis Schoenweather?
That does sound correct.
Just for the record, at that 2008, I was a prevention chief in Sector Honolulu,
Okay.
overseeing that unit.
Okay. Yeah.
Can you provide some details on the training you received regarding how to enforce passenger vessel operations?
So one of the biggest things that we looked at was that the COIs. So on the island of Kauai, there's not very many ports for these vessels to operate out of. As a station, we were limited ourselves because there's not very many places for the boats to moor up and operate out of. So basically, on the south side of the island, we had Port Allen, and then on the north side of the island, they were operating out of the one of the harbors up there. And then there was a couple other small boat ramps around the island. So everybody, the COIs there on the island were very restrictive for the areas of operations that they were allowed to operate out of. So it specified what port that they were allowed to go out of, as well as the area of operations. So when you went out to the Nepali coast is the most common tour area that the vessels operate out of, because there was not good radio communications out there, and the sea state could rapidly change from side to side of the island. I think that the COIs were pretty restrictive based off of where that they were going to be operating. So they weren't allowed to, I don't think anybody had a COI to operate tours around the entirety of the island. They were be restricted to the Nepali coast, and it would say specifically that they could operate out of, say, like Port Allen. So if they were in the summertime, wanted to go and operate out of, and it's slipping my mind, there's a very small boat ramp on the north side of the island, completely surrounded.
This guy talks a little quickly, so I'm gonna bump us back down to. We're not in any hurry here. I have a holiday tomorrow. So, oh damn it. now I've gone and messed it up. Give me a second here. This is a fine day we're having, isn't it? Yeah, let me. All right, we're at the 21:40 mark. See, chat. See how kind and caring and loving I am for you. I would do anything for you, even slow this down. As I was trying to say, tomorrow is a holiday here in Korea, so I don't have really any pressing social engagements to worry about. So we'll slow it down to normal speed without hitting the tracking bar, and we can just listen to it at normal speed because this guy talks slightly faster than other people do. So let's just take it on down a notch here, people. There we go.
And it would say specifically that they could operate out of, say, like Port Allen. So if they were in the summertime, wanted to go and operate out of, and it's slipping my mind, there's a very small boat ramp on the north side of the island, completely surrounded by a reef, had no Coast Guard markings to it whatsoever. It was used by locals. They had people.
And yes, chat, I would do anything for chat, but I won't do that.
PVC pipe in the reef, and if you didn't know what side to go on or anything like that, it could be pretty dangerous. We never operated out of it as a station because it wasn't an officially marked entrance going in and out of there. So I don't think anybody had a COI that said that they could operate out of that, a certificate of inspection to say that they could operate out of that port. So a lot of it had to do with that, was where they were operating at, and then obviously the number of passengers that they were carrying.
And so you mentioned during your initial statement that you had left active duty in 2015 with the Coast Guard.
That's correct.
Can you explain your relationship with the Coast Guard following that date?
Yeah, so I went into the Coast Guard Reserve at that point in time, and I drilled at the base Seattle, attached to the Naval Engineering Support Unit there, which I believe has been renamed. And I drilled there for 3 years from 2015 to 2018. And then in 2018, I went back on active duty orders for about 3.5 years and worked for Coast Guard Recruiting Command.
All right, we have just put up today's like and subscribe poll, which is designed to do nothing more than to remind you to actually like and subscribe. It's a way for you to get it out of your system here. We've done just about all we can do with audio. So today's like and subscribe poll to remind each and every one of you 365 people that have not hit the like button or the subscribe button to do so. The poll is, okay, everybody, get it out of your system. How is the audio balance? You are way louder than the video. You are slightly too loud. It's perfect balance. Don't worry. And so those are your those are your options. We'll just get it out over there. And we now return to your regularly scheduled hearings.
And then after that ended, I moved to my family and I moved to North Carolina, not related to the Coast Guard, and I remain in the Coast Guard Reserve today.
Are your duties today involved with law enforcement, or is it more a different?
So I was today. So I was attached to the Coast Guard station at Elizabeth City, and then I've since recently moved to Florida for a civilian job, and I am attached. I recently became attached to Coast Guard Station Panama City, and it's just boat crew duties. I don't do any law enforcement duties there at this time.
Thank you. Now I'd like to go to your time beginning at OceanGate and your experiences there, sir.
Yes, sir. So I took the job at OceanGate in, I believe it was April of 2017 is when I began. And I initially, when I took the job.
All right, now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of his job, what it was he did, and how he's connected to all of this. As we know from the scroll across the bottom, he has been an operations technician. So let's hear what his job was and how much of it he was allowed to do and how long it took, because we all know what happens to everybody. How long it took for him to have a problem that led to him leaving or being fired. And the problem is always contradicting or going against what Stockton Rush had to say. I don't know. Like I said, I don't even know who this guy was before this morning, but I'm calling it. I called he was former military, but I'm also calling the fact that he left the company because he had some sort of disagreement with Stockton Rush. Let's see how long it took.
It's made very clear that they were working with the University of Washington, the Applied Physics Lab, and Boeing. So they had a lot of what sounded like legitimacy behind them as far as the engineering. I was made aware of the concept of creating a carbon fiber, kind of a new design, and the goal for going to the Titanic. And then I also had met during that time with David Lockridge. He had a lot of credibility behind him and his experience. I had zero experience with any sort of underwater vehicle at the time, but I was hired on mainly to help with surface support operations, small boat maintenance, things like that. So that's the main reasons why I ended up taking the job at the time. And then I'd been given kind of I did about a trial week or so, I think, with them before I ended up accepting the job. So I was able to kind of see a lot of what initially was going on. In April of 2017, things seemed to be pretty well run in order there. I ended up, during my time there, I learned that the company had basically broken ties with the Applied Physics Lab at the University of Washington, which was concerning. And the explanation for it wasn't very clear as to why, other than that there was some disagreements. So that was my first kind of alarm bell, I think, in the back of my head. Something didn't seem right. The next one was that Boeing wasn't going to be doing the layup for the carbon fiber, that it was going to be a different company down in California. At the time, I didn't know that it was who it was, until I think we got the video, and they had hours and hours of video of this thing being laid up. And I remember looking at it, and it looked like it was just being laid up in a dirty warehouse down in California, which was also concerning. It turned out to be, I believe that was Spencer Composites. Didn't look anything like what I would have expected to see at a Boeing facility. And then the next, one of my concerns in that process was when it arrived, we had been told, and when I started, that it was going to be a 7-inch thick hole. And it showed up and it was 5 inches thick. It was just information that they weren't openly sharing with staff and employees. And so there was a lot of
That's some corroborating testimony there. that has been mentioned a few times, that it was originally supposed to be 10, then it was 7, and it ended up being 5. And this guy said that he said that David Lockridge, I almost said Stockton Rutch, had a great deal of respect and knowledge, but he was talking about David Lockridge had a great reputation and was knowledgeable. So yeah, I'm smelling the je ne sais quoi of the situation, should I say? We're smelling just the first waftings of discontent.
questions just among those of us who are not, in the engineering department as to why did the plan change and things like that. And there was no very clear answers.
And sir, I just want to clarify a few things for the record here. We are talking about at this time the first Titan hull.
Correct. Yeah.
And your position was in the operations department. Who was your supervisor?
Scott Griffith. Okay. So I worked directly for Scott Griffith. He, at the time, in my understanding, was the director of all the service operations, but he seemed to have a level of authority over David Lockridge at the time as well.
Was David Lockridge in your chain of command?
I would say not directly.
Was there a reason that in the operations department that as a non-engineer, you were taking an interest in the development of the submersible?
I think just in my experience as a machinery technician in the Coast Guard, as an engineer in the Coast Guard, anytime that you see anything that is out of the ordinary, you have to start asking some questions and making sure that you understand why you're doing what you're doing. I don't think.
Oh, I wonder if you saw anything out of the ordinary. if you look, from what we've heard over the past 8 days of testimony, if you spoke up every time you heard something out of the ordinary or unusual, you'd never stop talking.
That there is a qualification that I received while in the Coast Guard that didn't involve a thorough amount of knowledge and understanding of what you're dealing with. So I had the conversation with them about going through and becoming a sub pilot at some point in time. So that was one of my concerns as well, was for the design of this overall and for its safety.
Okay, please continue.
Sure. So during my time there, and I'm not sure exactly when it dawned on me, but the business model didn't start to make sense to me. We didn't have an income stream. We didn't have
do we need to say it, chat? So do we need to mention that if you're working for a billionaire and you're having cash flow problems, that might be a red flag? In my world, that would qualify as a red flag. If my billionaire boss told me, "Oh, we have cash problems."
They had kind of laid it out that there was this Coast Guard Foundation and that it was going to fund through its fundraising efforts, would fund kind of a scientific mission behind OceanGate. So that was my initial understanding of how that process was going to work, is that they would be raising money and then funding various oceanographic type expeditions.
Objection, Mr. McCoy, did you say Coast Guard Foundation? I just wanted.
The OceanGate.
OceanGate Foundation, okay.
Right. So just for the record, the Coast Guard has a foundation.
Right.
I think you may have
Did I?
said Coast Guard, but to clarify, it's the OceanGate Foundation.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The OceanGate Foundation would be funding research. The Coast Guard Foundation had nothing to do with it. I'm sorry about that. And sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
You've thrown him off his game.
That's how kind of the business model would work, and that it was going to be mainly for scientific making the oceans more accessible to researchers and stuff that didn't have these large grants and other access to large amounts of capital to be able to lease out subs and do kind of what I think I've listened to some of the testimony. It's kind of been laid out before, the cost and expense of operating research vessels and stuff like that for oceanographic research. So at some point in time, and I don't remember what month it was, but so the company had gotten hold of a new vessel for towing. They'd bought it, I think, from the government through GSA auctions, and so it was a former Coast Guard boat, and so I had experience maintaining and operating that. So I believe it. I can't remember her last name. Renata. I believe she testified before. She had come out, and I'm not sure what the purpose of her trip was, but I ended up taking her and Joel Perry. They went scuba diving down. There's a underwater dive park. I don't remember what it's called, near Edmonds, Washington, and they had been diving down there. So during that process, I had learned of her experience with OceanGate and that she had been on the Andrea Doria dive, and that's understanding how that went and occurred, and then finding out that she had paid money to go on the dive. That was my first indicator that something wasn't correct as far as the business model.
Oh, that's interesting. The operations technician guy. He's like, oh, I think we have a problem here when mission specialists are paying $25,000 to $35,000 to go down to the wreck of the Andrea Doria. I wonder how big of a problem it was when you realized they were charging $250,000 to go down to the Titanic. But yeah, that's something we've been saying from the beginning. A passenger pays. A passenger is someone who pays. Your crew, your mission specialists that are hired, the people that are hired don't normally pay $250,000. That is a big red flag.
And that they were trying to circumvent things. So I initially, I think I brought this up to Scott and asked Scott Griffith, and had asked him about the business model and what the plan was for income and for money coming into the company and how things were working, and essentially trying to understand to make sure that everything was on the up and up.
Nothing was on the up and up.
I got various answers. The most common one was, well, they're mission specialists. That term was used a lot, and they're paying members of the crew. Knowing that didn't, as far as my understanding, that didn't pass muster. That isn't you can't just change the title of a person when you're receiving compensation, right? I believe that.
Yeah. Oh, but they certainly tried. And again, I think this is going to be one of the big recommendations that you're going to see coming out of the Coast Guard are regulations. There be changes to regulations and or laws regarding what a passenger is, because they've been allowed to get away with this for quite a while now. It's ended up in 5 people getting squished. It's unreal. I mean, just the more we've listened to this testimony over the last 9 days of testimony, it's crazy to think that it made sense to somebody. It made sense to enough people that we'll just call these people mission specialists to get around calling them passengers. Because if we call them passengers, then we have a whole bunch of safety stuff and regulations and inspections and certifications and registrations we have to go through. Let's find a way to not call the passengers. And this is the best one they came up with. If you watch the earlier testimonial, you'll recall that the paying customers, the paying crew, as he just called them, the paying crew, and I believe it was the finance woman she made the suggestion that, hey, if they pay their money to go on these journeys, these voyages, we'll give each one of them that pays one share of the company's stock. Now, why would they do that? Because one of the exceptions to all these the rules for passengers and all these other things, one of the exceptions to the rule was that owners of a vessel could go down without without the regulations, the inspections, and certifications that would be required of a passenger type vessel. So if they called them owners, if they gave them one share of the company and called them an owner of the vessel because they own one share of the company that owns the vessel, then they might be able to get around of it. Somebody thought that was a stupid idea, but they also thought that just having them pay $250,000 to be a mission specialist was a good idea. Why did they decide to not go with owner? Because that's really stupid. that would be even more obvious than this. Again, it is. I know you've heard me say a few times already. If I buy a share of McDonald's, I'm not going to walk around saying I'm an owner of McDonald's. If I have a share of Apple, I'm not going to go around saying I own Apple. So this loophole that allowed them to do this, I think is going to be shut pretty tightly if people follow what sort of suggestions and recommendations I believe will be coming out of the Coast Guard in their report.
That you're only allowed to receive compensation up to cover certain expenses as far as the operating expenses of the vehicle directly. I think I had dug into the regulations on that a little bit more. The CFR, it's 46 CFR. Found I believe it's the table 2 is in there, which outlined that there is no 6-pack essentially operation for a submersible. So I had taken that and I emailed that to Neil McCurdy, who was the COO, and to Scott Griffith, and I was asking about, how are we doing this with a plan to take money for going to the Titanic, and what is the the operation here without having a certificate of inspection. That ended up leading to a couple conversations between myself and Scott, and ended up with Scott taking me to lunch with Stockton over at the brewery on site there in Everett. And we had lunch, and during that conversation, I brought up the concerns that I had regarding operating without a COI and not being inspected. He had a long list of issues and reasons why regarding, the complication, it was stifling the ingenuity and all these things. He tried to explain the mission specialist aspect to it. I talked about the receiving any sort of compensation aspect. He said that they were going to flag the Titan in the Bahamas and launch out of Canada so that they wouldn't fall under U.S. jurisdiction. I expressed to him that still taking U.S. passengers on there for hire at any point in time if they touch the
OceanGate,
US
not
land,
him. He's not the liar.
U.S. port, that would also be of consideration. It ended, the conversation basically ended when he, after explaining that the Coast Guard had tried to, shut him down in California, and that he wouldn't operate there anymore, but that if the Coast Guard became a problem, that he would buy himself a congressman and make it go away.
Mr. McCoy, is that a direct quote?
He said I would buy a congressman. And
well, that's not good. that's not a good thing to say, but see, this is where it gets weird. The stuff that you would normally laugh about and push out of the way and make fun of, quite frankly. Now it seems like there might be a little bit of something to it. And what I'm referring to is here he's talking about buying congressmen. As we talked about, Stockton Rush's family, he comes from a line of 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence, Mr. Stockton and Mr. Rush. Their children married, and he's the great grandson of them, I believe. His family's also donated a substantial portion of the land that Princeton University sits on. The New Jersey governor's mansion was built by one of his ancestors, a Stockton, I believe. Stockton Road runs around Princeton. His grandmother, I believe it is, she has an opera house or fine arts center named after her. Yeah, they've got the money, and the weird part of it is, we learned that his father was president-elect of the Bohemian Grove Club, the Bohemian Club, that does their the powerful, rich and powerful of the world congregations, where they do mock sacrifices to the owl god Moloch in ceremony. That is a conspiracy you would normally laugh at. But his father was president-elect of this organization that includes presidents, ex-presidents, congressmen, the world's rich and powerful, and Stockton Rush himself was a member of the club. So he was a member of the Bohemian Club. So when you start saying these things like by a congressman, you start to think, does the Bohemian Club in the Bohemian Grove people, is there a little thing going on there? Is there a little, this would be utterly laughable and ridiculous to even conceive of these things. But in this case, it kind of makes you wonder. Just saying. Proud Metal Music member for 16 months says, "Hey Jeff, thank you so much for being a supporter for 16 months. And AT1CVB41 says, catching up at 1.25. Legal Vices Coast Guard is not DOD. They are Treasury or Homeland Security. I didn't say they were DOD. I said he was military. I said they were military. And the Coast Guard is a branch of the armed services. They are under Homeland Security. But yeah, they are a branch of the military. That's what I'm saying. So I didn't say they're Department of Defense. I said he was a member of the military. He's a Coast Guard member. Therefore, he was a member of the military. So they are a branch of the U.S. Armed Forces under Homeland Security. Since they were there, then they weren't, and I think they went back to Homeland Security in 2014, I want to say. Anyway, let's go.
Basically, the problems would go away at that point in time, and that is direct. That will stand in my mind for the rest of time. I've never had anybody say that to me directly, and I was aghast. And basically, after that, I resigned from the company, and I couldn't work there anymore.
There you go. That's it. The exact same thing that happened with so many other people involved happened to him. Got there. There's just too much shenanigans going on. A person with morals and principles said, can't do it. Peace out.
I want to dig into your conversation.
Sure.
Do you remember, was anybody else there? Or was this you and Mr. Rush?
Scott Griffith was there at lunch.
How did you perceive the comment that he would buy a congressman? Was it intimidating, or did you feel it was more like bluster?
I felt like that he was trying to either intimidate me or impress me. That based off of his position and standing, that he would have the influence to tout the Coast Guard rules, or he could, make any problems that might arise go away. So at that point in time, I expressed to him, I said, whatever your concerns are for him and his company, my concerns were, I said, I was still in the Coast Guard Reserve, and I was concerned that if I was to be part of anything that I felt was not correct and would be a violation of U.S. law, that would put me at jeopardy. And I felt like that I had a higher responsibility in following the law, and that I felt like that if the Coast Guard wanted to, I could be recalled and held accountable that way.
Was it your understanding that if the Titan was flagged in the Bahamas and operated out of an international port in international waters, that would be a violation of Coast Guard or U.S. law?
I wasn't sure at the time, and honestly, I still, if it never came back to the United States, then my understanding is that I don't think that would be, but I'm not sure. So, but it didn't sound like it sounded like it was more of an excuse for going forward or trying to just simply calm my fears. I didn't really believe it at that point in time.
And to clarify, did you not believe that he was going to flag the Titan in the Bahamas?
I didn't know if he was going to flag it in the Bahamas. I just didn't believe that he was never going to operate it out of the United States again. Well, I guess I hadn't operated at that point in time, but was never going to operate out of the U.S.
Was the Titan prototype or the first Titan hold being tested at that time in Puget Sound?
No, the plans I believe were to start testing it around February. So this was late summer. So this was September of 2017. And so I believe the plans were to start testing in Puget Sound around 2018. So they were still assembling it. So it had arrived on site. They, I believe, shortly after it arrived, then they attached the titanium ends, and then they started building out the interior of it. And that's about where it was at when I left. I know the end caps had arrived, but they had not been attached yet.
You mentioned that you resigned the following day from that, after that dinner?
Yeah, it was a lunch. I believe I gave my notice the following day.
Yeah, and that's just sound survival advice. Certainly not legal advice, because we don't give any of that here. That sound personal freedom. It's a freedom preservation device. That's what we'll call it. A good freedom preservation device is when you are a higher up in a company, when you are higher up in the operations, and you have dinner with a boss, and he starts talking about buying congressmen. It's a way to preserve your freedom to resign from the company the next day. that's a very smart move. Oh, we're gonna start committing federal crimes. Okay, I'm out.
Did you give an exit interview with anybody, sir?
I did. It was kind of an unofficial with Bonnie.
He just
Carl,
double fingered and walked out.
She had pulled me aside as I was departing, and was kind of doing. It wasn't something that I guess the company had asked for. It wasn't part of their normal policy, but as that she was overseeing the HR side, she was doing informal exit interviews with a lot of staff. She advised me that there had been a lot of turnover, so she was been digging in to try to figure out why the turnover was so high at the company.
Shut up, dog. Sorry, didn't mean to hit the microphone.
Did you have any further discussions with your supervisor?
Just when I gave notice to Scott, that I told him that I couldn't be part of that operation, and my concerns for the legality of how it was operating.
Did he provide any response to that, sir?
No, throughout the whole process, Scott kind of just would echo what Stockton would say. So he didn't have a lot of, he didn't really interject any of his own thoughts or opinions on that.
At the time, you would have been a reservist at Base Seattle? Is that correct?
Yep.
Did you have a relationship with the sector individuals at that,
I did
at
not.
Puget Sound?
No, I did not.
I mean, by like Marine inspectors or that department at Sector Puget Sound?
No, I did not know anybody over there at the time.
Did you make any notifications to the Coast Guard after this occurred?
No, I had considered whether or not I needed to notify the Coast Guard. At the time, they hadn't dove on Titan in the U.S., so they hadn't violated anything regarding Titan. My understanding was with the Andrea Doria, that was, at my point in time, my understanding was a lot of hearsay from people, and how, I don't think anybody at the company of management had told me that, people had paid for it. I don't remember where that information came from. And that they were diving essentially but the term, dive for hire, nobody really wanted to use that. So I didn't have a lot of evidence per se that they were actively doing that. I initially kind of followed what was going on in the event that they did start diving. But David Lockridge had reached out to me about his, so not too much later, I guess that was in 2018, that he had left the company and that he had filed a complaint with OSHA. And so at that point in time, I kind of assumed that it would go down that route and that OSHA and if it passed over to the Coast Guard would get involved and a deeper investigation would occur. He did not ever notify me of the outcome of that. I've come to find out that he was under an NDA and more other things. So I didn't know where it went from that. And eventually I just kind of quit following the company, not thinking that they would ever actually dive Titan. So.
Well, they
Sir,
did.
you've discussed your familiarity with the certificate of inspection requirements. Are you familiar with oceanographic research vessel designations that are provided by the Coast Guard?
I am not. I've never, I know that they exist, but I have never dealt with them.
Understand. At this time, I'd like to go to Lieutenant Commander Emmons for any questions.
Good morning, Mr. McCoy. I just had one question. You had mentioned Mr. Lockridge in the conversation you had after he departed the company. Did you ever have any conversations with him regarding safety concerns, or did he ever have conversations with you regarding his safety concerns while you're both at the company?
Yeah, when I started at the company, there wasn't a lot of experience with anything to do with maritime operations. Pretty much when I started, it was David, and that was it. They made Scott Griffith was my boss. He came from the construction industry. It was very clear that he had no maritime experience. He had never operated on the oceans outside of some recreational stuff, and he had never worked in the marine industry.
Sounds like a perfect guy to run your company.
The other operations technician at the time was Ryan.
Ryan
Ryan's,
somebody.
Stockfleet. And he had not come from a maritime background at all. So initially learning some of the ways that they were operating and the things that they were doing was of concern to me. And I had some concerns and regarding, whether how we were towing the Lars operation, things like that. And then that ended up developing over time. There was a lot of safety conversations when the first Cyclops 2 or the first Titan hull arrived. That was a constant conversation amongst most everybody, almost every day.
And what were some of those conversations?
So conversation being one was the size. And then as I think it's been attested to before,
I've just got to say, I know I've said it before, but I've got to say it again. Anybody that's seen Wentworth, this lady could do the questioning. She looks so much like Joan Ferguson. She scares me. she totally looks like Joan Ferguson from Wentworth.
The ends of it, as you looked in it, it didn't look like a very quality layup. There was a lot of conversations over how it was going to be tested. And I think that came to that it was going to be Stockton was going to take it down himself. And it was interesting. It went really quickly from, they had considered testing it out in Maryland at the ocean test facility there. But that with the cost would be too expensive essentially. And so that Stockton would just take it down and dive it. Anytime that,
just take it down and dive it.
Well, why can't we just, essentially put it on a cable and pull it down to the ocean floor? If you want to test it on land, then that's a whole lot probably cheaper. They just wouldn't even be open to conversation about that. And so there was a lot of just concern overall. I think the engineering department didn't seem overly qualified. So that was a concern they seem to be handling all the design, especially once I kind of found out that the University of Washington really wasn't involved anymore. And nor was Boeing. So you're looking for who is the qualified individual that's making these decisions. And it was really, the engineering staff over there was Tony Nissen, and then what I think they had one or two other full-time folks. But everybody else was basically college interns during that summer while I was there.
Great.
So it was
What
pretty
could go wrong with
concerning
that?
over the qualifications for what they were attempting to do with that submarine.
Great. College
Thank
interns.
you. That's all. I had, Mr.
Fantastic.
McCoy.
Sir, Lieutenant Commander Whalen has a question.
Thank you, sir. Did you ever have any discussions with Mr. Rush or anybody at OceanGate regarding retired Rear Admiral Lockwood while you were there?
Yeah, so it came up at one point. I don't remember exactly when. So I learned that he was on the board, and I don't remember where I had learned that. But there was a conversation. I don't remember if it was in passing it specifically, but I think that Stockton was just trying to
Say it.
basically, it came up in conversation that they had been sharing information about the development and the design with the board. And I think that it was one of those conversations of trying to calm nerves and to say that, Admiral Lockwood had, they had done a brief, and, he'd even commented feedback on that he was concerned over the Lars design with having those air tanks exposed and towing it in the North Atlantic. But that was about all I had for conversation regarding Admiral.
Now, this is a little insight into how some of these companies and corporations work. If you're not familiar with it, they want names on the board. You want to be able to say, we have a 2-star, 3-star, 4-star general. We have a 5-star general. You can't really say that these days, but you want to have like a general or an admiral, or you want to have some big business guy. You want to have some influential person on your board, so you can name drop and say we've got this person on the board. But essentially, they just, and I don't know whether the admiral was getting paid here or not, but a lot of times they'll just take these outside directors and pay them money to just be able to use their name. They don't want them to come to the board meetings. They may have voting restrictions on whether what they can vote on or whatnot. But a lot of companies will just have a big name or two on the board without any real power. But it seems like at least this guy was actually briefed. The admiral that he's talking about was actually briefed, and it even raised concerns about the way they were just dragging the Titan behind on a 250-meter tow cable through the North Atlantic. But I just thought it would be interesting to let you know that there are companies out there that just say, yeah, we have Admiral so-and-so, we have General so-and-so on our board. Whereas they may or may not have any real power at all.
Lockwood. And so that was from, in conversation with Stockton. I don't remember when that was, but that was the one thing that stood out about that. I didn't know much about Admiral Lockwood.
Thank you.
So I'd like to go to the climate, work climate at OceanGate during the time you were there. Were the senior personnel open to receiving feedback? It is interesting that you had meetings with your supervisor and the CEO of the company.
Yes, Stockton was in and out a lot. He didn't, my interactions with him directly, he seemed just, well, he seemed to be very defensive whenever anybody asked questions that were pointed. But other than that, so Neil McCurdy and Scott Griffith were both very easy to talk to. They would listen, but I feel like that there was a lot of just almost mouthpiecing for Stockton and for what he was trying to accomplish. And so the one person that really took things serious was David Lockridge. And it became very apparent that he was unhappy with the interactions going on. I know that he had no faith in the engineering department there, especially Tony. And there were concerns. He started kind of filling me in, David Lockridge did, about how things went as we were talking about once the Cyclops 2 arrived, or the Titan Hull 1 arrived.
That
and
would
we
be
were having these
Cyclops
conversations
1.
over the hull, and the viewport concerns were were mentioned at the time, and they were trying to, you know, and then we also had the two contractors that worked there, Chris Imes and Tim. Can't remember Tim's last name all of a sudden, but they were both subcontractors for the company, so they would come in and out over that summer while I was there. And just talking to them, they had a lot of submersible experience. They had a lot of questions that didn't seem to be getting answered as well, regarding the design, the build, and what was occurring and how that was proceeding forward. So, and then I started hearing some stories about Stockton's temper. David had shared with me the story of the Andrea Doria dive and them getting stuck, and the having to get out of that situation, and Stockton's kind of his temper towards David having to take over, and that was also very concerning, that he may not have had the temperament to be doing this kind of work.
Well, according to everybody except for the Rojas woman, he panicked, he freaked out, and David Lockridge said he launched the controller at his head. Back then, they weren't using the Logitech; they were using a PlayStation 2 controller for the first Titan, and he got it stuck on the Andrea Doria, and David Lockridge tried to get it unstuck, and in order to get he got a big fight with Stockton Rush, and reportedly Stockton Rush hurled the game controller and bounced it off Lockridge's head before Lockridge was able to get them off the wreck of the Andrea Doria.
Did anyone else ever have concerns voiced to you about Mr. Rush's temper?
Spill the tea.
Not that I can remember. I mean, the only people that were really there at the time while I was there on the operations side were Scott, Griffith, Ryan, Stockfleet, myself, David, and then I think there was an intern. She came through for a little while, Michaela Monroe or something like that. And then there was they hired on somebody right before I left, and so. But other than that, they weren't very.
Was the conversation at lunch a heated discussion?
It became very tense. I felt very uncomfortable initially, just kind of laying it out, what my concerns were. I thought he'd be a little bit more receptive to it. And he was very quickly, you could see the avoidance of we're not taking passengers for hire kind of thing. And then as he shifted over to well, we're going to flag it outside the U.S., it became a pretty tense conversation.
Did you clearly explain your background in the Coast Guard to Mr. Rush?
I think I
did you tell Mr. Rush that you know what the fuck you're talking about and he doesn't? Did you mention that to him?
I explained to him that I'd been a boarding officer in the Coast Guard, and that, my understanding and experience with, vessels, for passengers for hire, and that, I initially, when I started with the company too, I wasn't aware that submersibles didn't have a 6 passenger exemption for uninspected. So that was later. And then, excuse me, yeah, so that specific information I'd found out while I was working there, but I explained it to him. He didn't seem to care.
And sir, before I go to the NTSB, we've been going for about 45 minutes. Would you like to take a break?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Thank you. All right, Mr. Muse.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. McCoy. I have no questions, Mr. Chair.
Commander Willen.
Mr. McCoy, do you believe that Mr. Rush understood the regulations as they were in place at that time?
I absolutely do.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You have to understand them to know how to get around them.
Do you know what a professional engineer is?
Yes.
And what is a professional engineer?
So a professional engineer is a person who has basically they have to have a degree in their specialty field, and then they work in the state of Washington. I believe it's a 5-year program that they have to work under another professional engineer, and they have to meet a set of milestones. And basically at that time, then they become licensed as a professional engineer in that state that they are operating in.
And at the time that you were employed with OceanGate, was there a professional engineer that you were aware of on staff?
I don't believe so.
And in your employment now, and I believe you work for a shipbuilding company.
I do.
Do they have a safety first policy or any type of employee safety policy?
They do.
And
Every company has a safety first policy. You're not going to find a company on earth that says safety last. It has like safety last banners put up all over the factory or all over the yard. I think that was the biggest softball question we've had of this entire proceeding.
And in the policy that you work with now, if you were to bring up a safety concern, what's the process for bringing up a safety concern?
So they have a director of safety or a safety manager at the company that oversees the entirety of the safety program. And then there's an entire safety department involved in that process. And then there's also and the safety manager answers directly to the CEO of the company. So there's not any of the other directors or vice presidents are in that chain. And then any complaints that are brought up or concerns are basically are brought up and forwarded to that department and then investigated by that department, who acts independently from the rest of the shipyard.
And was that similar to the same process as when you were with OceanGate?
No, it was, there was no formal kind of an outside of your normal chain safety process. It was basically you would bring up your concerns directly to your supervisor, and they would work their way up, and they were always adjudicated somewhere up between whoever your director was and Stockton.
Was there a safety officer at OceanGate that you were aware of?
No.
Thank you.
Mr. Fawcett?
No safety.
Good morning, sir.
Surprise.
Did you retain copies of any emails between yourself and OceanGate related to your safety concerns?
I do not have any emails retained from 2017, no.
And then did you hear or see any communication regarding documenting or state registering the Titan?
No, I think I had asked about that because they did have Washington numbers for the Antipodes and for Cyclops 1. So they had WN numbers for those two. So those were clearly, and U.S. flag vessels. I believe I asked if that was the plan, and I think that the answer was just no. And then it wasn't until lunch that they talked about with Stockton, where he talked about flagging it in the Bahamas. That was the first time I'd heard that.
So as a Coast Guard boarding officer, if you saw a vessel that didn't have registration numbers in navigable waters of the United States, what action would you take?
Well, so they would not be allowed to operate. There would definitely be, at a minimum, it's going to be a citation written. You're going to, being that they're not allowed to operate in U.S. waters, you're not going to allow them to continue their trip. So they're going to have to head home and be terminated. And it would most likely be a citation. And then it would be entered into missile and tracked from there if they attempted to, try to operate further.
And that's the Coast Guard's database we've talked about here at great length.
Correct. Yes. The marine information for safety and law enforcement, I believe.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Mr. McCoy, during your entire time in the Coast Guard, have you ever encountered a vessel that did not have either a U.S. document, U.S. flag, or a state registration underway?
I had I did a boarding on a vessel. It was a sailboat that had
drugs in it.
It had conflicting information
drugs in
regarding
it.
So it had been U.S. documented, but the documentation had never been apparently transferred over to the new owner. So the bill of sale and all the information that said who the ownership was. So essentially at that point in time, I believe it was considered to be, we considered it to be an undocumented vessel, being that it had not been transferred over. And he was cited for that.
Just a
And just to clarify, that would be an expired registration or documentation.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So it was a previously documented vessel at that point in time. The certificate of, sorry, the certificate of documentation was no longer valid.
Are you aware of how the Coast Guard tracks recreational and commercial vessels in the missile database?
Yes, in the terms, if you're referring to, so by vessel name, you can search by VIN number, and you could also search it by their state or their documentation number.
And by VIN, you mean vessel identification number?
Correct. Yes.
And that would be the Coast Guard documentation number if federally documented.
Correct. Yes.
From your experience, would it be hard to track a vessel in our database that was not registered or documented?
It would.
Yeah.
It would probably need you would probably need some amplifying information in there. I would assume if it's going to be flagged in any country or any state, I believe it's common though that they would have to have affixed a VIN number to it or a vessel identification number to it. So if otherwise it would just be, if there's no VIN number, then that I would assume as a boarding officer that it's not flagged or documented.
During your time at OceanGate, the approximately 6 months, are you aware of any operations that OceanGate conducted with the Antipodes or the Cyclops?
During my time there, it was all just test dives, so testing equipment and doing some training dives. So with Antipodes, we towed it out a few times just out there in Everett Harbor, or it was just testing at the dock. The biggest thing for Antipodes at that point in time was that they were just making sure that they were keeping it up to date, and because it had an ABS class, I think that they did an ABS inspection on it that summer. So that was part of the reason why Tim had come up, because Tim and Chris Himes they
Tim
helped
with a
the
Y,
maintenance of,
T-Y-M.
Antipodes and Cyclops. And then Cyclops was just training and testing of various equipment. So and that was all done there out in the harbor, just outside of in Possession Sound, just outside of Everett. And that was that was when they actually installed the modem. So they were doing all like the text information. Prior to that, it was all voice communications through the basically the underwater phone that was used.
Which submersible was that, sir?
That was on Cyclops 1.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to go to OceanGate for any questions.
Sure, thank you. Mr. McCoy, you mentioned that
they
you
have a question.
started at OceanGate in April 2017. When did you leave?
September of 2017.
Thank you. And Commander Whalen asked you about Admiral Lockwood. Did you have any conversations with Admiral Lockwood directly?
No, I never met him.
You, in response to Mr. Neubauer's question, you mentioned the dive operations with Antipodes and Cyclops just now. Did those involve anyone, to your knowledge, who paid to go on those dive operations?
No, I believe everybody that was on the submersibles was all OceanGate staff.
Thank you.
Mr. McCoy, before we conclude with your testimony, I'd like to call a short recess to make sure we don't have any final questions for you, sir.
Sure.
The hearing will now recess and reconvene at 10 a.m.
All right, and really quickly there, let's put this here in its place while we take care of some business. All right, people. I don't think they have any more questions for him, but we'll get there in just a bit. But before we skip ahead to the end of the break, I just wanted to welcome all 474 of you that are here, and we have 303 likes. That means 170 of you still haven't done your job. At least 170 of you. Get down there and hit that like button. You know you like it. You're here. So Everybody should hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, I would just be tickled pink if you would do me the honor of subscribing to the channel. I would be privileged and gratefully indebted to you if you would do so. And if you have already subscribed, please double check to make sure you still are, because YouTube is asshole sometimes. And let's see, we have our like and subscribe poll. How's our like and subscribe poll going? There's a bit of an audio thing going on here because they're ridiculously low with their volume. So we have them boosted to 600%. I'm pulled way down. But just to let everybody get it out in the chat here, we set up the like and subscribe poll. Get it out of your system. How's the audio balance? 27% so far said you're way louder than the video. 18% say you are slightly too loud. 29% say it's perfect balance, don't worry. And 26% just say re. So there we go. We'll just check back at the end of the show because I really don't care. This is the best we can do. But potentially criminal Sean with a $2 super chat. Imagine having to put OceanGate on your resume. He was there very shortly. I think former OceanGate would sort of indicate that you're smarter than the average Stockton Rush. But yeah, it's probably not a great thing to be tied to, is it? And this, there's two things we got to do here with the potentially criminal Sean. One is to remind you that you should be subscribed to him. Even if you don't know who he is, go over there and subscribe to him. He does some great breakdown of legal issues. He does some great trial coverage. He does some great insight into the workings of government and such things. Sean is the real deal. Sean is a practicing lawyer. He knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about. Make sure you get on over to Potentially Criminal and subscribe to Sean. And number two, Sean has moved us to within $48. That's 5 cups of coffee away from unleashing the emotional support potato pig dogs for the 24th consecutive day. All we need is 48 more to get us there. It's up to you, Chad. Do we keep the streak alive with 24 days? Just 48. Just 48 little dollars. That's just 8 cups of coffee away. Let's skip ahead and see if they have any more questions for this guy. I don't believe they do, but let's see. Scroll. Nope, they are going for a very long break, so that indicates no. That's a very long break. Oh, there's a brief little bit in there. All right. What are they going to say? All right.
The hearing is now back.
The hearing is now back.
In session?
In session.
At this time, does the board or OceanGate have any final questions for Mr. McCoy? Mr. McCoy, is there anything that I haven't asked or the board hasn't asked that would be of value to this investigation that you have?
I think we've covered most of my experience with OceanGate.
Thank you again, sir, for reaching out to the board during this proceeding. We appreciate you changing your schedule to be here today. You are now released as a witness at this formal hearing. If I later determine this board needs additional information from you, including any emails that you may have, if you can check the archive again, I would appreciate that. We will contact you through directly. And if you have any questions about this investigation, you may contact the investigations recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele. Thank you again, sir.
Thank you.
We will now take a recess. Our next witness, Captain Jamie Frederick, is scheduled to be at 10:45. If we can contact the witness, if he's here, we are going to try to start at 10:30. The hearing is now.
Okay. Well, thankfully we had closed captions because it did my volume thing again. For some reason, there's something wrong with this widget. I'm going to have to uninstall it and reinstall it. But occasionally, if I pause it on my end, I lose the audio. It still goes through and you still hear the audio. I just don't. But so I was reading the closed captions there to see. So now we have to do this little annoyance here. Give me a couple of quick seconds. We have to share that, hit the timestamp, copy that, close the window, open another window, paste that, and hit the go button again, and reshare. There we go. Now we're going to fast forward through this very long break before we get to the next witness, who is from Boston, Coast Guard Boston sector. And before we get to him, let's bring this up here. Ooh la la Pat says Doggo Cam Fund, expensive coffee in Korea. Geez, $5 for a cup of coffee? Isn't about what it is at any Starbucks anywhere on planet Earth? Starbucks charges at least $5 for a cup of coffee, don't they? I don't know. It's about what they charge here for just a basic coffee from Starbucks. Thank you so much, ooh la la Pat, all the way from Paris. I hope the coffee is cheaper in Paris. Thank you very much. And Island with the $5. Come on, y'all. How's a girl supposed to face Monday without a little emotional support? We need the doggos. It's self-care. Do it for the children. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Island. And thank you very much, ooh la la Pat. And thank you very much, potentially criminal Sean. And let's see. I think that's really all we have to do here for the midterm. Let's move this. Oh, a friend of mine is in the Coast Guard. She's a solid individual. I pinned that because it was just a little anecdotal story. I was drinking with a member of the U.S. Coast Guard until about 4:30 a.m. on Sunday morning. It started Saturday night, but he had a cool story. They are in. There's a U.S. Coast Guard ship in Korea right now that is searching for a particular airplane that crashed into the ocean during the Korean War. So they're trying to find the wreck so that they can do a recovery of any remains and repatriate them back to the States. So they're here for a couple of weeks searching for this one particular downed airplane. And while I met him in my friend's restaurant, we were drinking stuff. He just came from Antarctica, 2 months in Antarctica, where he is now officially listed as the person in the Guinness Book of Records for having the southernmost dive. He's dove in waters farther south than any other human on the planet. So I thought that was pretty cool. He showed me the unboxing video of his certificate from the Guinness World Record folks. But anyway, KDP all the way from up north in Seoul, South Korea. How are you doing, KDP? She's got the real 10,001 squiggly monies. Had a terrible weekend, but the day is getting better with Vice's crew and Pig Dogs. I had a pretty okay weekend. The parts that I remember. Thank you very much, KDP, for sharing. That is super awesome. All right, let's jump back into this. We are now even closer to the emotional support potato pig dogs. We're off to do the math, but it looks like we're right about 20 away. No, it looks like we're about 15, 16 away. I'll just do the math as we get going here. But this guy looks like the real deal as well. Oh my, he's got the G. Gordon Liddy look. Just when he walked in, the mustache looked unfortunately short, but now that we get a better angle, he's just going for the G. Gordon Liddy look.
Captain, before we begin, just want to clarify, we try to minimize the use of acronyms. So if you can define those as if they're used.
They've got a lot of.
And if you ever need a break, just let me know and we'll take a recess. I see that you have counsel with you today. Counselor, can you identify yourself for the record, please?
Lieutenant Commander Jesse Brenton, 1st Coast Guard District.
We are exactly 25 away from Pig Dog Cam.
Captain Frederick, I'd like to start by going over.
Okay, the one thing I do need to do, and again, I don't know if it'll do any good, but I do need to bump his volume up the required 600% on the booster widget that may or may not be functioning. Let me scroll this on up there. And let's go.
For your education and work experience background that would be relevant to your testimony today, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this morning. First, I'd like to, on behalf of the entire Unified Command, offer our deepest condolences to the family and friends of the 5 people that were lost aboard Titan. I've been in the Coast Guard for 30 years. I've had a variety of both operational and staff assignments. I think for the purposes of the hearing, I'll just focus on operational assignments that have given me my search and rescue experience. So I enlisted in the Coast Guard in 1994, and I served at 2 units as an enlisted member on an
So
operational.
he's been there 31 years.
Mission cutter, and then at a small boat station where I was a boat coxswain. So basically, I drove a small boat and conducted search and rescue operations at the very tactical level. After officer candidate school, I served at Coast Guard Group Key West, where I worked in the command center, and we ran the operations in the Florida Keys. I was, while the SAR system has changed a little bit, for all intents and purposes, I was a search and rescue mission coordinator there, and ran search and rescue and law enforcement operations. My next operational assignment, I was the commanding officer of Coast Guard Motor Lifeboat Station, Cape Disappointment, Washington. That's at the mouth of the Columbia River. It's known for the lifeboat school is also there, a center of excellence for heavy weather boat operations. And my unit was in charge of conducting search and rescue on the Columbia River Bar, the offshore environment there, and the Columbia River. Next, I was the chief of law enforcement at Sector Northern New England, where I oversaw law enforcement operations in Maine, New Hampshire, and then on Lake Champlain in Vermont and New York. Fleeted up to be the chief of response there, where I was then in charge of all of the operations. Essentially, it's like being an operations officer under the sector commander in that same area. I then went to work at the Coast Guard 1st District, where I was the chief of law enforcement for basically just a broader area. The 1st District encompasses from basically Sandy Hook, New Jersey to the northern border. And I ran or oversaw the policy and operations for law enforcement, but I also was a search and rescue mission coordinator, and I held active search suspension authority at D1. And that is the position I was in last June when the Titan case took place. In July of this year, I assumed responsibilities as the sector commander and captain of the port in Boston, Massachusetts.
Sir,
Yes.
just to clarify, can you define what D1 is and what that means from a Coast Guard standpoint?
Sure. So the Coast Guard is broken into districts. So on the East Coast, there are several districts up and down the East Coast. There's 5 in total. The 1st Coast Guard district is basically the Northeast. So from Sandy Hook, New Jersey to the Canadian border. And as part of that responsibility, the 1st Coast Guard district, the command center there is also Rescue and Coordination Center, Boston. And those responsibilities go to 1,300 nautical miles offshore.
Thank you, sir. Any other background before?
Well, you'd asked about education. So I've been to various schools in the Coast Guard for search and rescue planning and oversight. I hold a bachelor's degree from Troy University and a master's degree from Johns Hopkins.
Thank you, sir. I'd now like to, for you to describe the area of responsibility and how the Coast Guard prepares for search and rescue offshore from the 1st District.
Sure. So I think maybe I want to take it to kind of an elementary level to start, and because when we talk about the timeline, I'll talk about receiving the call. So I want to explain what that means. All over the Coast Guard, we have sectors, which are work under the districts. And I don't want to make this confusing, but and then we have districts, and the district has a command center where the sectors within that district report to. So in this case, it was the 1st Coast Guard district, which I said also encompasses Rescue Coordination Center, Boston. In those command centers, we have 24/7, 365 days a year watchstanders who are professional search planners, mission coordinators, and they stand those watches. And so if I refer to a command center, in this case, the 1st District, that would be the 24/7 watchstanders that are there. Now, outside of the command center, there's a very deliberate chain of command in the search and rescue chain of command, and it consists of a search and rescue mission coordinator, which is deliberately outside of the command center to provide oversight and search planning. And then active search suspension authority, that's the role that I was serving in during the Titan case. That's an additional layer of oversight. There's 2 additional responsibilities that generally come with that position. One is you're generally the person that communicates with the next of kin and families during the case.
And you are also the person, if and when a case gets to a point where you suspend the search, that would make that decision. In that role, you work directly for the SAR coordinator. In this case, the SAR coordinator was the First District Commander, and that was Rear Admiral John Mauger.
Thank you, Captain. Now, can you go back to the events of how you were notified of the Titan initially back on June 2023? Oh, I'm sorry. And before you do that, sir, can you define AOR?
Yeah,
For the,
sorry, it's an area of responsibility.
and for the rest of your testimony, we've defined search and rescue as SAR, so you can just
Thank
use
you.
SAR.
Thank you. Okay, so sure, I'm happy to talk about the timeline in general terms, and we can drill down if anywhere that you want to. So on Sunday, and I'll use so for the time, I'll just use local time in Boston, Massachusetts, so Eastern Standard Time. We received a call into the First District Command Center at 5:40, so 17:40, 5:40 p.m. We received a call, and it was a report of an overdue submersible at the site of the Titanic. So in simplest terms, when that call came into the command center, it was an overdue. And we consider an overdue vessel. There's different ways that you classify search and rescue cases and different scenarios that get you into different phases. In this case, we were in the distress phase. And an overdue vessel, in the simplest terms, means that you have confirmed departure from a location and confirmed non-departure. And that would put you in the distress phase. Now, in each of our command centers around the country, these professional watchstanders have checklists that they go through. They're often referred to as a QRC, which is a quick response card. And there are quick response cards for all sorts of scenarios, from the most basic to the most complex. And in this case, we were really working off two. There's one that exists for subsurface search and rescue, and then of course the overdue case that I spoke of. So our watchstanders were working through those. Of course, the call was anomalous, and it was, I talked about it being simple in the terms of an overdue, but it was complex for many, many reasons. One, you're talking about a multi-dimensional search, subsurface and surface, because at the time we were working under the understanding that the emergency procedures for a Titan was that the vessel would surface, and the distance offshore, the fact that there were no readily accessible response resources on the surface. But what I would say is our watchstanders are incredible professionals, and the first thing that they did is to look for air assets. And we happen to have a Coast Guard, United States Coast Guard C-130 on deck in St. John's. And ironically, that aircraft was on deck in St. John's because they were conducting an international ice patrol mission, which is something the Coast Guard does as a result of the sinking of the Titanic. We were able to speak to them, and they had the crew had the capacity to fly. So we immediately launched them to conduct a surface search. And then we started working through those checklists, and over the course of going into Sunday evening, there were a lot of things that were happening. We reached out to our higher headquarters at Coast Guard Atlantic area, and they were the main conduit to the United States Navy at Fleet Forces Command, their battle watch. We were talking to them. We were querying the Navy if they had any available resources. Unfortunately, they did not have any available resources that could respond in a timely manner to the area. We were obviously talking to the Canadians, who were incredible throughout this entire search. And one of the things that we found on the checklist for submersible search and rescue, and I'll tell you, in my 30 years, and I've worked thousands of search and rescue cases, this was the first time I'd ever worked a subsurface search. There's an organization under NATO called ISMERLO. You're going to get me on the acronym here. I think it's the International Submarine Escape and Rescue Liaison Office. I think those are all the words. I may have gotten them out of order.
See, even the military doesn't know all the acronyms they use. They they just know the acronym without knowing what's behind it. In some cases, but we had a question from Great Success. What does it mean to have 4 stripes on your sleeves? It means you're a captain. And if you look at her, she's got two thick bars with one thin bar. That is her rank. She is a lieutenant commander, which is there's like captain, then there's commander, then lieutenant commander is under her. And unlike other branches of the service, in the Coast Guard and Navy, captain is just below admiral. So that's what the stripes on the sleeve mean. And Ooh La La Pat said, did he say Cape Disappointment or do I have Monday Blues? Yes, he said capes always have good names. Like Cape Disappointment, Cape of Good Hope is one of the most dangerous places on Earth to sail around. We've heard about how they'd been conducting some operations. The OceanGate people have been conducting some operations in Cape Witless. So there's a lot of good names for capes out there.
And we reached out to them, and they have a 24/7 phone number you can call, and they start going through their procedures. And as part of their procedures, they put out a broadcast, basically a global broadcast to vessels at sea that have subsurface capability. So really what we were looking for at that time is ROV capability. And the vessel Deep Energy responded. They were a deep sea pipe laying vessel, and they agreed to start heading to that location with their ROVs. Now, they had 3,000 meter ROVs on board. From the time that from the time of initial notification, I believe that Deep Energy was on scene within 34 hours. By Monday morning, we were flying Canadian aircraft, both for the surface search, and at that point, we were flying P3 aircraft with the capability to listen with sonar capability. And really, I guess an important point I want to make is from the initial call, from the time that we launched that Coast Guard C-130 out of St. John's, we flew nose to tail. So that really means when an aircraft was landing, another one was basically taking off all the way up until Thursday. We were also working with the Canadian Coast Guard to get Canadian Coast Guard cutters on scene because they were the closest. We knew that we had a Coast Guard cutter that was working off a United States Coast Guard cutter that was working off of Greenland, but they were, the initial reports were they were 4 to 5 days away. And we were reaching out to as many partners as we could, including the New York Air National Guard, who flew several sorties for us as well. Over the course of Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we continued those air searches. Deep Energy arrived on scene on Tuesday morning, and they immediately commenced ROV operations. And again, they were limited at 3,000 meter ROVs. A point I want to make there. So one of the most basic principles in search and rescue is that you go to the last known position. And that's something that, of course, we were efforting, but we were limited in our capability. And when Deep Energy arrived on scene, they pushed one of their 3,000 meter ROVs beyond its operating capability in an effort to get to the last known position, and it failed. And they brought it back to the surface, and from that point forward, we did not push beyond the operating capability. And I think I'll get back to, we can talk about the ROV planning outside of that. It's kind of a separate string of effort. At the same time, we were working vigorously to put together a team of experts. And those team of experts ultimately formed the unified command. And I strongly believe that we brought in the world's best experts. We had, and I'll probably miss some groups, but we were obviously working with the U.S. Navy through Fleet Forces Command. We had ComSub, PAC and LANT, NAVC, Naval Sea Services Command, and then we also were working with Navy, so Soup Salve, which is supervisor of dive and salve operations, United States Navy.
And Captain, I think you said ComSub.
Yeah, so commander of submarine forces, both Pacific and Atlantic. We also had subject matter experts on board, so submariners from the Royal Navy. We reached out to, we're lucky to be located in Boston, Massachusetts, where we have a lot of resources. We reached out to Woods Hole, to the oceanographic, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and they sent us subject matter experts, particularly one subject matter expert who was a retired Navy captain, sub-commodore. He was in the Unified Command. And we brought this team together, frankly, because OceanGate was operating without a plan. And we brought a team together.
Yeah, big surprise. Operating without a plan. And unfortunately, that a lot of times that means you don't know where they are. I'm sure that wouldn't be the case here, right? They knew where they were diving because they had the surface vessel there, but not having a plan, yeah, that's unheard. Well, it's not unheard of. It's just the stupidest thing you could possibly do going out of the ocean. And Mexican Vader says, "What is a cape?" I'm guessing it's not the fancy superhero dress wear. It's just basically a point of land, like a high point of land that sticks out into the ocean. I wonder how much the rescue operations cost, including retrieving the wreck, and who pays for it. Astronomical amounts of money, and the Canadian and U.S. taxpayers pay for it. That's the Coast Guard's job, and that's what they were doing. So, yep, taxpayers paid for days and days and days of 24-hour plane flights, vessel sweeps, etc.
To come up with a plan.
Oh, and we are $25 away from unleashing the emotional support potato pig dogs, just in case you're wondering.
To effect a search.
Captain, I just want to clarify a point on that. When you say they were operating without a plan, do you mean a backup emergency rescue plan?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Not a voyage plan. He wasn't saying they were operating without a voyage plan. That's the stupidest thing you can do when going on a voyage. Not having a safety and rescue plan, that's probably a close two in the stupid things to do.
And, if you look at it, so essentially on Sunday afternoon from a standing start, we were handed, I think what many would think is, but before this, almost an impossible task. And from 5:40 Eastern Standard Time on Sunday to 9 o'clock in the morning on Thursday, we had a 6,000 meter ROV on the ocean floor at the site of the Titanic. And I've talked quite a bit with some of the experts from Soup Salve, and they will say that they consider that as unprecedented, and can talk about some of the logistics it took to move those ROVs.
And Captain, just for the record, I want to clarify some of the dates. When you say Sunday, that would be June 18th, 2023.
Correct.
Tuesday, June 20th, 2023.
Yes.
And then that Thursday, approximately 4 days later, June 22nd, 2023.
Correct.
Okay. Captain, can you clarify why the U.S. Coast Guard has responsibility for international waters over the Titanic for search and rescue?
Absolutely. So that's a question we've received quite a bit, I think. And what I would say is, it was never a question within the community of experts that understand offshore search and rescue. The world maritime is divided into regions with responsibility clearly defined in international law. And the area that the Titanic rests is clearly within RCC BOSO Rescue and Coordination Center, Boston's area of responsibility. So I think an important point is those predetermined search and rescue agreements are critical. And what that means is there was never a delay within the community of professional responders. When the Canadians in Halifax received the call, they knew immediately it was within Boston's responsibility, and they reached out to us. And the other thing I would say is we work so closely with the Canadians on a day-to-day basis. We exercise plans. While we've never exercised a plan for a submersible rescue, we certainly exercise them for search and rescue, for oil spill response, and we have close working relationships, and those paid dividends during this case.
Captain, when you talk about unified command, the concept, can you give a little background on that? And was it a physical location or virtual for the unified command?
So it was both. So under the Integrated Command System, ICS, ICS exists for large scale or even moderate scale responses. And what it gives you an opportunity to come together and use a common terminology. It sets up a battle rhythm for meetings, a battle rhythm for making decisions. In this case, we knew clearly that we didn't have all the subject matter expertise, and we needed to bring as much of that to the table as we could as quickly as possible. And we had a large number, we had more people in person than virtually. However, we leveraged technology to the full extent, from Microsoft Teams holding meetings to talking to the cutters on scene, the Canadian Coast Guard cutters, and the polar prints via satellite comms.
And earlier you mentioned, I believe you said you flew Canadian air assets. And I just want to make sure for the record that you were directing our Canadian air assets to fly. It wasn't a Coast Guard, U.S. Coast Guard flight, correct?
Well, we had both, right? So there were multiple sorties throughout the course of the search. United States Coast Guard C-130s flew along with the New York Air National Guard and then the Canadian Air Force.
Thank you. And as the SAR coordinator, you were able to direct Canadian assets?
Absolutely.
Captain, can you talk about some of the information and challenges that you had up until the point where you were able to get a visual on the wreckage itself?
Well, I mean, the case was challenging for many reasons. The distance offshore, the fact that we didn't have Canadian or Coast Guard surface assets there for a few days. The fact that we were limited initially to 3,000 meter ROVs. We were working vigorously to bring in additional capability. I mean, that's obvious, right? Because we got to the point of having a 6,000 meter ROV on scene on Thursday. I'm happy to talk to some of how that was planned.
Before we go to that, sir, I'm curious if you had communications with OceanGate or the crew of the Polar Prince that were on scene at the site.
We did. We had been talking to OceanGate and the Polar Prince throughout the entire search. In fact, in the early days of the search, the Polar Prince actually served as the on-scene commander because we were limited and that was the only option.
And it is standard practice in the Coast Guard to use a commercial asset if necessary to be the initial on-scene commander?
It is. I mean, it's not ideal, but in this case, again, it was the only option. And so to have an on-scene presence, that you have eyes on scene with communication capability. Again, they had satellite comms, so we were talking to them on a routine basis. And, ideally, we would have liked to have transferred on-scene commander to a United States Coast Guard cutter or a Canadian Coast Guard cutter, which ultimately we did, but that took some time.
All right, we'll stop them here at the completion of that sentence to discuss a couple of things. One, we've just been raided by Aussie Overlord. Welcome, Aussie Overlord Raiders. We are finishing day one, the morning of the final day of the Coast Guard hearings. We will do the afternoon session tomorrow. So thank you and welcome all of the Aussie Overlord Raiders. give Aussie Overlord a super special shout out there in chat mods. And if you get a chance, everybody make sure you go on over and subscribe to Aussie Overlord. We're gonna be doing something together tomorrow, I believe. So that should be fun. Please stand by for that. Number 2 thing we need to do is we need to mention that This Is Flaming Dwagon has said they should bill his estate. Possible? I don't know. Unlikely. I would say unlikely. I don't have anything other than personal belief to support that, because they're doing their job. It's like that's their job, search and rescue. It would be sort of like firemen billing you for putting out the fire in your house if you did something stupid to start it. I don't know if there's anything that legally prevents them doing so, but it would kind of be bad form, I think. But on an interesting note, related to that, now the Korean Coast Guard, they've just recently started doing something similar to that. So if you get in an accident, if you get in a shipping collision and you spill oil, let's say you spill some oil, and the Coast Guard, which that is part of their duty, that's part of their job, is oil pollution cleanup and protection and things like that. But they are now starting to bill ship owners for the costs of the materials that they use and for labor. It's very, very new in Korea, and it's interesting to see what happens. I think there's only 1 or 2 judgments on that issue, but it's an interesting concept where people doing their job may or may not be able to bill you for doing their job. Vince Clortho with the $2. Release the hounds. We are now officially $21 away from unleashing the emotional support Potato Pig Dogs. Been there, done that. Remember, for 22 months, that's darn near 2 years. Says, I have a sinking feeling about this. Dun, dun, dun. Oh, I keep forgetting I actually have a dun, dun, dun button, but too late for that. Thank you so much. Been there, done that. Thank you so much, Vince Clortho, and thank you so much. This is Flaming Dragon. Let's continue with the captain's testimony.
Do you remember when that transfer occurred, sir?
I believe it happened on Wednesday. And that's not to say, so I believe that John Cabot may have arrived some hours before that, maybe even into Tuesday, but you have to understand that transfer takes time. Whoever is serving as on-scene commander has lines of communication established, and there are plans in place, and you want to make sure the transfer is smooth and you don't lose any of the progress that you've made. So it's a deliberate process. It takes some time, and we did it as quickly as possible.
Oh, and Jill says, God, just imagine how much money was spent on this search and rescue mission. Don't know what the Canadian figures are, but the U.S. estimates are that the U.S. government spent $1.2 million on the search and rescue, which I find to be shockingly small. That seems shockingly small to me, but if that's all it was, good. Good.
And Captain, was it the understanding of the Unified Command that the Titan had survival systems on board that would allow the crew to remain alive, submerged for a period of time?
Yes, it was. We understood that was possible. There was also from the Polar Prince, OceanGate was also presenting us a scenario where the Titan could have been somewhere in the water column. So we focused our subsurface efforts with the 3,000-meter ROVs to search the water column. We were working with subsurface experts within the Unified Command who were gathering undersea currents and data that gave us additional information to focus those searches. At the same time, as early as Monday, when the P3s were flying, we were receiving information from the aircraft that they were detecting underwater noises via sonar, and we were exploring all of those pieces of data as well.
Sir, in your experience, can you explain the Coast Guard's duties and approach about possibility of survival and how you weighed that to potential suspension of the case?
Well, I would say in this case, we really never even got to the point to have the discussion of suspension. And I wouldn't even want to speculate on when that would happen. But what I will talk about the amount of due diligence that we put into every single search and rescue case. Every day around this country, the United States Coast Guard oversees search and rescue. And I think maybe for the purposes of this hearing, I will present an example of a very simple overdue case. So if you were departing on a sailboat from Charleston to, say, Key West, and you filed a float plan and you told your family or a friend that you were going to leave on a certain day and arrive on a certain day, and you gave additional details to that, and then you didn't arrive when you're supposed to, and you have no, and so let's say the family or friend who's in contact with you now has no contact. So now you have lost comms, you have confirmed departure and confirmed non-arrival. So that's exactly where we were on Sunday the 18th with Titan. But now let's take it again to the case of the more simple case of a sailboat. We would go into a distress phase in a case like that, and we would search. And I can't tell you, it would depend on a case by case, but it may be a track line search where an aircraft would fly the route. It could be, there could be many different options based on the information, the weather, and a lot of different things. But the point is, we would have assets up looking. We would also be doing investigative work, calling different marinas or places where they possibly could have gone to, and we would run every lead to ground. Now, I'll present another scenario, another piece to that scenario. If we received a report in that case with a sailboat from Charleston to Key West that someone saw a vessel that fit that description, it was a credible source, it looked very much like it, and it pulled into Isle Morada, we would run that lead to ground. We would send either a Coast Guard unit or local law enforcement to that marina, and we would investigate. And we would not stop search efforts until we got to a point where there's no longer a reasonable expectation of survival, or we found what we were looking for. So I bring that up in context of, reports of sounds and other things that were happening, and the fact that we continued to search. Well, that's what we do in every search and rescue case.
Are you aware of other Coast Guard search and rescue cases that expanded beyond several days to weeks or that period of time?
Yeah, absolutely. And every case is different. If you're searching for a person in the water who is reported maybe fell off a sailboat and is in a life jacket and you're in the North Atlantic, well, obviously that period of search may be shorter because of water temperature. It's much different if you're searching for a person in the water, maybe wearing a life jacket in the Caribbean. And in this case, we had a lot of different information coming in, and with it, we were within 96 hours in this entire case.
And Captain, I believe you testified that over your 30-year career, you had not been involved in a subsurface search and rescue case. Is that
Yes,
correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Are you aware?
All right, we will pause before this next question to take care of a little business here. This is Flaming Dwagon with the $2 says they should. Oh, we already did that one, didn't we? Shh. Sorry, we even had a follow-up conversation. Sorry about that. This is what I meant. This is where I meant to start. This is Flaming Dwagon. Same person, different chat. But you get charged for a run in an ambulance. Interestingly, I believe that the ambulances are sort of private companies that run the ambulances. So basically you pay for their service or you don't. I don't know. I could be wrong. But anyway, you do get charged for the ambulance rides. they if you're lucky enough to have insurance, great. If not, you're looking at easily $1,000 just for taking you to the hospital. Now I'm curious about the ownership of ambulances. This is Flaming Dragon. Thank you so very much for the question. You should also pay for a full military operation caused by stupidity, in my opinion. Well, that's what the Korean government is starting to say. Let's see if the U.S. follows suit. John H. 2004 with the $5 super chat says this guy wants to ask about how he got the 6,000 meter ROV. He must be proud of how it happened. Yeah, I would be proud too. I would be extraordinarily proud. The Coast Guard are amazing people. And Corn Pope even said this. It sounds kind of like he's saying how extraordinary and amazing they are. It sounds strange. It might sound strange, but the Coast Guard, they are the best out there. The search and rescue. That is what they do. That is they do that on the daily, all around the United States and often in other parts of the world. But yeah, I don't have any problem with him saying we did a damn good job and we did it much faster than should have been done. And W. McMaster says, we know for a fact that the Coast Guard heard the implosion when it happened. This is stupid. My understanding is it was the Navy that heard what they were fairly confident was an implosion. They didn't know for sure, and I don't think they told anyone. That only came out weeks later that they had recorded what sounded like an implosion. I believe they didn't tell anybody. The U.S. Navy didn't. But I do think the search and rescue went on a little bit longer than it needed to. Aaron Hack with the 20. Release the hounds, Strawberry and Yoda. Well, we are now officially at that part of the show, which we call Release the Hounds. And we bring on our emotional support potato pig dogs who have been unlocked for the 24th day in a row, keeping the streak alive. The chat is awesome. Oh, I just woke up Yoda. So, all right, here's the emotional support potato pig dog, Yoda, and Strawberry is sleeping under the desk. Yoda doesn't look like Yoda's going anywhere soon, so they have their comfortable beds, but they just prefer to sleep on the hard floor. So whatever. These are the emotional support potato pig dogs. Yoda will be our focus for the evening. Thank you very much for getting us there for the 24th day in a row. Jinver, member for 24 months, 2 full years. The U.S. Coast Guard is the only branch of the military that are deployed 24/7, 365. And they do a damn good job. Can Strawberry breathe? Both of them struggle at it. But all right, that is our emotional support potato pig dog unleash. So let's continue, and we will adjust the camera as necessary.
Of any other Coast Guard subsurface searches in recent history or even the last 30 years?
No, I'm not personally aware of any.
Are you aware of the last subsurface search that the Coast Guard conducted?
I am not.
So is it fair to say that was the first time you'd ever used the subsurface QRC?
It certainly is for me. I would point out one thing though. It's not uncommon for the Coast Guard to oversee operations where maybe we don't have all the subject matter.
I was chastised. I missed Bush's super chat. Shame on me. I actually meant to talk about it more, and I don't know why that translated to don't talk about it. I talked about this hearing late stream last night. People didn't believe me, but I have receipts from Legal Vices. PS4 controller was what they knew. Well, there never was a PS4 controller involved. The Titan had a Logitech joystick, and the Cyclops 1, the prototype of the Titan, that had a PS2 controller. So it had a PlayStation 2 controller. They went from PlayStation 2 to Logitech. So there never really was a PS4. They were 2 generations before that. And I just had to reorder my PS4 controller because it had serious drift, which I hope the Logitech didn't have any drift problems, because they didn't have a backup. They didn't have a backup controller on board. Yikes. Thank you, Bush. Sorry I missed you.
I don't want to go too far, but I would say, look no further to an oil spill where we bring in subject matter experts into a unified command. It may be a science support coordinator who helps us figure out booming strategies and the recovery of oil. It's not even the first time the Coast Guard has overseen underwater operations. I think you could look to the Deepwater Horizon event, where we certainly didn't have subject matter expertise to run ROV operations in thousands of feet of water to cap a an oil well. But we brought those subject matter experts into the Unified Command, and under our oversight and leadership, we conducted the operation. And I think that's an important point, because that's what the United States Coast Guard brought to this case. We brought a bias for action. We brought leadership, and we brought experience in bringing different agencies together in a response operation. And the Coast Guard has a unique competency, I believe, an ability to bring those partners together, both private and public, and in this case, international, which we certainly needed.
In your opinion, is that the power of the incident command system, ICS, to bring expertise needed into an incident?
It is, and it provides a mechanism to do that. In a search and rescue case, it may not always be the absolute perfect fit, but in this case, it gave us the avenue and the structure to bring those experts in to get the mission accomplished.
Cam, I'd like to now discuss some of the ROV choices and availabilities to the Unified Command during the incident. We've heard previous testimony that the Coast Guard did not utilize available ROVs for the search and rescue effort, and I'd like to hear if you can clarify that point, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So a couple things. I think I'd first like to frame kind of my response in saying that there's limited resources worldwide, right? What we're looking for obviously is a 6,000 meter ROV. So those resources are limited, and then they need to be available, and they need to be available quickly. And in any response, you may not always get the perfect resource to the scene, but you want to get the best resource there as quickly as possible. And I think it's important to understand a few things with respect to the ROV planning in this case. So the first point is that OceanGate reached out to Pelagic on Sunday, the 18th. I believe, I don't know the exact timeline, but it was somewhere right around the time that we received initial notification. So OceanGate had already reached out to Pelagic in conjunction with notifying the Coast Guard. Now, what I would tell you, Pelagic at that point started making preparations, getting their team together. They had their ROV that ultimately made it to the scene, the 6,000 meter Odysseus ROV, was a flyaway kit, meaning it was packaged and ready to go, but not, it's my understanding, and I'm not an expert, but my understanding is there was some workup time and some preparations that still needed to be made. Normally, all of this would take weeks, if not longer. So Pelagic started making those arrangements. Now, what Pelagic didn't have, they had the flyaway kit, they had the 6,000 meter ROV, they had the expertise, and they knew they could get there. But they didn't have the ability to move all that equipment. And what we offered from the Unified Command is the ability to talk to United States Transportation Command and move that heavy equipment. So, and I think I heard an earlier witness say that we didn't use an ROV from New York. So the Pelagic ROV did come from Western New York. And we flew that ROV with the help of U.S. Transcom, so Transportation Command. And it took 3 C-17 heavy lift aircraft. I think it was in the neighborhood of, in total, 70,000 pounds of equipment. That's an immense amount of equipment to move. Now, to just talk about those logistical challenges, that equipment had to be moved to St. John's, and then it had to be trucked from the airport to the seaport, and then it had to be loaded onto a vessel of opportunity, which was the Horizon Arctic. Now, again, normally would take weeks to do this, and I think there's an important point to be made here as well. It's not as simple as when that equipment shows up at the seaport, you don't just pick it up and put it on the vessel of opportunity, but it has to be welds. There has to be brackets that are fabricated, and it has to be welded to the deck. And it was an incredible team effort with the team from Pelagic and all the folks on the ground that went through that. And they were able to load all that equipment on board and get the Horizon Arctic underway, I believe, on early in the morning on Tuesday. Is that correct? What is the timeline? No, it's Wednesday. So Wednesday the 21st at I think 5:30. So 5:30 in the morning, local time in St. John's, they were underway. Of course, they were on scene by Thursday, and they arrived in the early hours, and by 9 o'clock local, they were on the ocean floor, and we had discovered the debris field. While all of this is going on, we were working with a subsurface team of experts in the Unified Command, and they were the folks from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who have done extensive mapping of the ocean floor of the site of Titanic. They were providing the team information on where they believed the Titan would be, and their information was accurate. When we were able to get the 6,000 meter ROV on scene, they quickly found the debris field. An additional thing I wanted to bring up on the ROV. So on top of, in addition to working to get the Pelagic team out there, we're talking about that level of heavy lift. I mean, that's an immense amount of effort to get that equipment on scene. At the same time, we had a backup plan. And the backup plan was there was a French vessel with a 6,000 meter ROV, and they were en route. What they didn't have was their ROV, the team of operators. And we were working behind the scenes as quickly as we could to get that team of French operators there. And that was a pretty immense effort in itself. And the Canadians were incredible in that effort. The French team flew into St. John's. They were escorted by RCMP, a police escort to the port. They loaded onto a Canadian Coast Guard cutter, and they were headed out to scene. And they arrived on scene on Thursday, but of course, by that time, the Odysseus was already in the water.
Captain, I think you mentioned it earlier, but were there any communications issues between the Canadian Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, or any other like military type, not military assets, but government assets?
No, not beyond the normal, maybe normal challenges you would, any response. Communications can be a challenge, but I would say nothing that impacted our ability to get the mission done. In fact, I would actually argue the opposite, that the communication between the U.S. Navy and the United States Coast Guard was incredible. Our Coast Guard Atlantic Area Command, Atlantic Area Commander at the time, Vice Admiral Lunday, was having communications directly with the Navy, and we were receiving all of the assets that we needed.
However, the continued use of the phrase
during your time in the first district,
correcting.
Did you ever have any exercises or search and rescue exercises with the Canadians prior to this event, sir?
We do. We exercise with the Canadians on an annual basis.
Did that always occur every year?
It does. Whether it be a tabletop exercise where you're just exercising the plans and the lines of communication, or exercises where you're actually putting assets out on the water.
During the response to the Titan, were there any weather factors that influenced the search?
There were several days where the ceiling was low. I think the aircraft were limited to there were 500 foot ceiling at certain points. I mean, in general terms, the search conditions were good. It's relative, right? You're 1,000 miles off the coast of, or 900 miles from Cape Cod, 400 miles south of St. John's. It gets rough, but we weren't hampered severely by weather.
Thank you, Captain. At this time, I'd like to pass the questioning to Lieutenant Commander Emmons.
Good afternoon, Captain Frederick. Can you explain who's in charge of search and rescue operations for the Coast Guard in the distress phase?
Well, I mean, the SAR coordinator is always ultimately in charge, but the search and rescue mission coordinator is the one who is overseeing the operations.
In general, you had mentioned your search and rescue training, but can you kind of describe the training that command center staffs receive to execute search missions?
Sure, there are formalized schools at our training center in Yorktown. There's also on-the-job training. There's extensive qualifications and tasks that you have to do, and it takes ultimately to be a search and rescue mission coordinator, it takes years.
And is underwater search and rescue taught in SAR school?
No, I don't think there's any detailed level of course material there. And I understand this is these events don't happen with a high level of frequency. So again, though, you can apply the basic principles of search and rescue really to any response, and that's what we did in this case.
Was there any impact to Titan search operations due to personnel shortages or either on ashore or the ships or aircrafts that would normally have been utilized for the search mission?
No, not to our resources. What I would say, though, is that anytime you deal with a response of this nature, a large scale response, your local resources are, you're overwhelmed in the beginning. But what you do and what we did is you bring additional resources in, and we did that. We brought in the Coast Guard incident management team, some additional public affairs support, and we started to build a team of support around the existing command structure. And another thing that we did is we separated the Titan search from the watch floor, so from normal first district operations, because as this is going on, there are operations that are going on all over the Northeast. So the first district's the Northeast on any given day. I mean, look at a day, just yesterday, we had search and rescue cases going on in the Northeast. We had our sector in New York was overseeing maritime security operations for the United Nations General Assembly. I mean, these things are going on a daily basis. And when you have a large scale event, you need to separate that and keep everyday operations going on.
Was all the equipment that would be used in the search and rescue operations in a full state of readiness, such as computer systems, software, radio, communications, vessel assets?
Yes.
What are the Coast Guard procedures, what Coast Guard procedures will cover the planning and execution of subsea search and rescue operations?
Well, like I said, there's a checklist for that you go through, and in many respects, the initial actions are the same, right? We talked about, we put assets on scene because again, we had to operate under the assumption that there's a possibility that the Titan was on the surface. So that planning, we're calculating the set and the drift through computer models that we have and coming up with search patterns to continue to search the surface. At the same time, we were conducting subsurface searches with really being driven by the data that we were receiving from the experts in the Unified Command.
How do those QRC code, the quick response cards, how are they developed?
So they are living documents. I think is probably the most important piece of that, right? We, as technology changes, as the environment changes, those are updated. There's always, so they exist, but there's always an opportunity to change those. And so they're developed using our experience and expertise, but again, they continue to grow and develop as things change.
And yeah, I know you kind of went into this a little bit, but at the time of the incident, did the Coast Guard maintain a list of resources that might be contacted to assist in underwater search activities, or did that come from the company who maintains like a list of available resources?
Well, we didn't have a list of necessarily available ROV resources, but what we did have is, I mean, one of the first places we reached out to was to the United States Navy. And then we started to work from there.
You had mentioned that OceanGate didn't have a rescue plan. Can you kind of go into that? How did you know they didn't have a plan?
Well, if they did, it was never presented to us in the Unified Command.
Well, that was a short
Become
answer.
aware of reports of noises being detected on sonar buoys in the vicinity of the search location. Can you kind of expand on the details of if you received reports of noises?
Sure.
Okay, this is a good answer here. This is
really
important.
as soon as the P3 started flying, so Monday the 19th, and we immediately were. So a couple things we did there. We were investigating the noises, both with the polar prints and their sonar capability, obviously with additional P3 flights, and then we were gathering all of that data over the course of really the next 24 hours or so. And we packaged that data and we gave it to the United States Navy and they analyzed it. And I believe by, I don't know, I can't remember the exact date, either Tuesday, the 20th or Wednesday, we received a definitive answer from the United States Navy that two pieces of information that they told us. One was that the sounds were not coming in regular intervals as was being reported. There was a lot of reports of 30-minute intervals. The Navy looked at that data and said that that wasn't the case. And two, they were
that was I guess the banging that they were talking about, like the knocking sounds that they heard. There was some misinformation about that, and this is what he's clearing up there with the number one answer he just gave.
100% certain that it was not human in nature or knocking on a hull of a vessel. And as soon as we received that information, I personally shared that with the family before we released it in the media, with the families, I'm sorry.
How did receiving that report affect your search and rescue decisions?
Well, it's one piece of data, right? There were about 1,000 pieces of data coming into us. We were also very, very close to having the 6,000 meter ROVs on scene at that point, and we knew exactly what we needed to do, and that was to get the pelagic ROV on scene early Thursday morning and get to the last known position. So we continued to work as vigorously as we could to reach that goal.
Were you ever told by crew members or employees of OceanGate on board the Polar Prince that they felt or heard something around the time they lost communications with the Titan?
No, that was never passed to the Unified Command.
Did you only direct the surface search and rescue assets, or did you also direct the underwater search and rescue assets, such as the ROVs?
The Unified Command was directing both. We were providing that information to the on-scene assets on where to focus those underwater searches. Again, being limited at the 3,000 meter, we were doing everything we could, working with the Polar Prince and OceanGate under that theory that there was a possibility that they could be somewhere in the water column, which, as you can imagine, that's an incredibly difficult search area.
And you kind of mentioned it, you start with the last known position. Is that kind of what you did to direct those with the decisions you made with the Unified Command to put the ROV down there? You just kind of started with the last position. Do you just kind of send it straight down, search patterns? How does that work?
Well, yes. However, we were working with the team really from Woods Hole and the other subsurface experts to take in some additional data, and they gave us a location which was accurate.
When exactly did the Unified Command stand up, and who made the decision to stand up the Unified Command?
Yeah, so Rear Admiral Mauger, the SAR coordinator, made that decision, and it was on Monday the 19th.
And you had talked a lot about subject matter experts in the Unified Command. Who else was part of the Unified Command?
I think I gave a full list there. I mean, from the United States Navy to the Canadian Air Force, the Canadian Coast Guard, the team from Woods Hole, I'm happy to provide a detailed list to the board. I think
All right, we have a very important question, I think, here from the Fed postinator. It says, what is the water column? The water, it's talking about the column of water from the surface to the bottom of the ocean. It's sort of like, you have like the different eras of soil. If you like dig down the soil, you got, the various layers. It's essentially the various layers of the water. The top, the surface, then down to a certain salinity, certain density, certain light, certain temperature, and then you go down to a different habitat level where there's less light, cooler temperatures, more pressure. It's just referring to the column, the different layers in the column from the surface to the bottom of the ocean. I hope that made sense.
I named just about everybody that was, but I'm happy to provide that for the record.
And was OceanGate part of the unified command?
They were. I mean, the polar prints, I think, yes, OceanGate was part of the unified command.
And did they have a representative either virtually or present in the unified command?
They did not present. The representative was aboard the polar prints.
Do you know who that representative was?
It was Kyle Bingham.
So yeah, basically everything under the surface. Yes. The doggos are especially adorable today. They're always adorable.
Aware that submersible operations with passengers on board were taking place near the Titanic wreck site on June 18th, 2023.
So I will not speak for the first Coast Guard district was not aware.
Okay, thank you. Is there Coast Guard guidance regarding notification of submersible operations within a Coast Guard search and rescue area of responsibility?
I don't know.
In your professional opinion, do you think advance notifications of such activities to the Coast Guard would aid in search and rescue operations?
I don't know necessarily if it would aid in search and rescue operations. I think you want to have a general sense of what's happening in your area of responsibility. In my current role as a sector commander and captain of the port, if these operations were going on somewhere in my captain of the port zone, I would want to be aware of that.
And when did you learn that you were no longer in the search and rescue mode or the distress phase and the Titan was a complete loss and all lives on board were lost?
It was on Thursday morning when the Odysseus arrived on scene. The first piece of they discovered the tail cone first, and then as we continued to find additional debris, it became apparent that it had been a total loss.
And who made the next of kin notifications?
I did.
Did you feel that you were provided all available information from OceanGate during the search?
Well, I mean, hindsight's 2020. We certainly, there is so much information that's been discussed over the past 2 weeks. I think it's a valuable point to say we didn't have a fraction of that in any search and rescue case. Maybe they start off like that, right? There's a saying that we use that the initial reports are always wrong and they're late. And in the fog of that response, things change. So we certainly didn't have the level of information that's been brought forth.
Thank you, Captain. That's all I have, Mr. Neubauer.
Thank you. I want to make just a statement to the record that the MBI has not received any evidence to date indicating that there may have been disturbance around the polar prints around the time of the implosion. Captain Frederick, we've been going for over an hour. I'd like to take a recess at this time, and we will reconvene at 11:45.
Okay, while they're taking their little break, we will put them down here in the corner just for a quick second and see if there's anything. I have a few things starred here. Bush McFadden says, Legal Vices, Mr. Maritime Lawyer, how many times have you been scuba diving? I have been scuba diving a grand total of nearly once, almost once. But I have been snorkeling a few times. And Bush also mentioned that it's $7,500 for a 15-minute ride in the wee woo wagon in the States these days. Dang. Getting injured and or dying is big business these days. All right. Well, that's what we've got logged in here. So we got that. Those were all the comments that I had highlighted. We are now 2 hours and 31 minutes into this. We're going to fast forward this to the end of the break, and we will continue on until the end of his testimony, when I assume they're going to take the lunch break, and then we'll do the afternoon session tomorrow and wrap up our coverage of the Coast Guard's investigation, the public hearing portion of the investigation into the loss of the Titan sub. We currently got 466 concurrent viewers and 399 likes. Let's get up to 500 likes. Come on, everybody. Let's push this up to 500 likes. Why not? We can easily get to 500 likes because I know there's at least 100 of you that haven't hit that. And thank you so much. We can take down the poll now, I guess, which was get it out of your system. How is the audio balance? We've reached an agreement on the audio balance. This is what we've got here. So we'll end that poll, and we'll have to think of a good poll for tomorrow. Who is the female naval officer next to the witness? She is a lawyer. She's a Navy lawyer, no, she's a Coast Guard lawyer. She is the Coast Guard lawyer, Lieutenant Commander. I can't remember her name, but that is the lawyer that the Coast Guard says here, sit next to him. All righty, let's see. Scroll on through. Excuse me, had to clear the throat there, but my hand is busy, so. All right, they're back on the record, it looks like, right there. And let's see how long they go for. No, it did the thing, didn't it? Did it do the thing? Nope, it's just them talking. Yes, it did the thing. Dang it. All right, I got to go. This is a good chance to see here. We got right from the 2:59 mark. Oh, looks like they're going to wrap up with him real quick. All right. We are just about done here, ladies and germs. Let's see. We have to do the widget is behaving inappropriately thing here. Copy, close. Let's see. Shut that window down. Open up a new window. Copy, paste. Close widget. Reopen widget. Adjust widget to 600% and hope it does something. Now watch this totally screw up the awesome balance we have with the audio right now. And present screen here. This will be one of the last times we ever have to do this. Embiggen and play.
The hearing is now back in session.
And I will now
Captain Frederick, before we continue with
embiggen the embiggening.
I need to make a second clarification to the record, and I'd like to use Exhibit 64, please. Exhibit 64 is our answers that the master of the polar prints provided to the MBI based on questions that we asked to him. And I'm going to read from question 26, which reads from the Coast Guard MBI. Did you or your crew members hear or see anything after communications were lost with the Titan that could have indicated that the submersible imploded? The answer from the master was, with the benefit of hindsight, I now believe I felt the polar prints shudder at around the time communications were reportedly lost, but at the time, we thought nothing of it. It was slight. And Captain Frederick, I think that's important for you to hear from, and I'd like to get your perspective on if this was identified immediately, this slight disturbance by the crew, and reported to the Coast Guard, would that have changed the search and rescue posture at all, in your opinion?
Absolutely. That's the first I've seen that. My initial reaction is if that was information they have, to me personally, it'd be unconscionable that they would not share that with the unified command. I don't want to speculate on how it would have changed what we did because that's a piece of information we didn't have. But it's fair to say that it certainly would have been information that could have had a drastic impact on the search efforts.
And what does that?
And to
what-
clarify, though, this
All right, let's push pause there and go back a little bit. What does that even mean? He's absolutely correct in everything he just said. Did you or your crew members hear or see anything after communications were lost with the Titan that could have indicated that the submarine imploded? Answer: with the benefit of hindsight, I now believe I felt the polar prints shudder at around the time the communications were reportedly lost. With the benefit of hindsight, wouldn't you have a better view, a better impression of what you felt and what you did at the time it happened? Right after that, what do you mean, like later you remembered that you might have felt something? That's a weird answer. With the benefit of hindsight, I believe I felt the polar prints shudder. But at the time we thought nothing of it. Well, it's not up to you, whoever answered this question, to decide whether or not it was important. If you feel a shudder, if you felt a shudder, if you felt something, if you thought you felt something, you should pass this information along to the people that are conducting the search and rescue operations. This is a weird, shady, bizarre answer as far as I'm concerned. Stupid scooter outside the window. But I don't even understand why someone would give an answer like this. Now that I've had time to think about it, I think I might have felt the polar prints shudder. That's a sus answer. I'm sorry.
Impact on the search efforts.
And to clarify, though, this, from the crew's perspective, it was not immediately connected to the event. So that is why we understand it was not reported to the search and rescue effort. Captain, there's been a lot of discussion about the underwater noises that were reported to the Coast Guard during this time. Can you get into detail about the data that you received and how you handled that during the rescue mission?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So I think you're referring specifically to the data we received from the United States Navy. And then also, of course, we were receiving data from the aircraft that were using sonar. So on Monday, the 19th, I was made aware that the United States Navy had detected an anomaly. That information at the time was classified. And as a military officer, the United States Coast Guard is a member of the intelligence community in the United States. We treated that information as you treat information at that classification level, and it wasn't for us to share with the family or with the public. It was one piece of data. It wasn't definitive. The Navy couldn't tell us that it was 100% definitive answer that it was an implosion. At the same time, we were receiving conflicting evidence from the P3s and the sonars where they were detecting knocking noises. So I think it's important to kind of understand that in the full context, because I know it's been widely reported in the media that we had some information that somehow we were holding on to, and we continued the search when we knew what the answer was. And I would tell you, no one knew what the answer was definitively.
That's a very interesting answer. That clarifies a few things. It's like you said, the the Navy detected what they thought was the implosion noise, and it was classified. It was my belief that they hadn't passed it on to the Coast Guard, but I guess they had passed it on to the Coast Guard, but the Coast Guard was still keeping that classified. So that explains a. What do you want, Straubs? That explains a little bit. So, and as far as the knocking noise goes, they finally determined that it was likely the noise of one of these search vessels. But okay, so we did know the Navy did pass along the information to the Coast Guard, and it was classified. No, it's not still classified. We played it, I believe. I think we played the. I think we played that noise on a previous stream. It was either that or we played the knocking sounds. I can't remember. We may have done both. I can't really remember, but it's obviously not classified now because they're talking about it. Why would it be classified? I don't know. I would surmise it was classified because they didn't know what the source of the noise was. I just don't know.
And Captain, I think this is an important point from your professional experience. Since there were conflicting sounds heard underwater, and if a slight disturbance on the vessel was reported to the Coast Guard initially, do you think the Coast Guard still would have conducted a search and rescue mission?
It certainly would have changed the equation. I don't know what that would have looked like. But it certainly would have changed the discussions, and ultimately that would have been the decision of the SAR coordinator.
At this time, I'd like to go to the NTSB for any questions.
Good morning, Captain. Thank you for your testimony, the detailed testimony. I appreciate that. Because of that, though, my follow-ups are going to be in some sort of random order, what's left to ask, and I apologize for that. We're aware of a OceanGate project execution plan that was specific to the 2023 trips to Titanic. And in there is a list of ROVs with phone numbers and a lot of other SAR assets. Was that ever shared with the district?
No, not to my knowledge.
Do you know if Pelagic was notified beforehand? Like, were they prepared for this, or was it a surprise?
That makes sense. That makes sense, Squid.
It's my understanding that the first time they were made aware was on the evening of the 18th, when OceanGate reached directly to the CEO. And at that point, he started to again make preparations to get the team together and get the Odysseus flyaway system ready to go.
So it's your understanding that they weren't on some sort of retainer or anything ahead of time?
No, that is not my understanding.
Was it OceanGate or the Coast Guard that reached out to the French ROV?
I don't know. I think that went via, so I think that was via the Unified Command, but I don't know the answer to that.
How about the Deep Energy?
Well, the Deep Energy was contacted via Ismerlo, which I defined earlier, if you want me to say that again.
Can you explain for us what enhanced group calling is, and was that of any use to you in this case?
You're referring to being able to put out a safety net broadcast?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we, it was of use. I mean, that's how, so Ismerlo put out a safety net broadcast soliciting that additional capability. And it's, there are other ways that we do that via, on surface searches. We'll often, if there's a search and rescue case that's happening 1,000 miles from shore, we'll put out broadcasts and look for mariners at sea that can render assistance. In this case, it was more complicated, and they were specifically looking for underwater capability in ROVs.
Can you share anything about the range, capabilities, resolution of the John Cabot sonar? Was that of any use in this case?
We used the sonar on all the vessels that were on scene. I don't know the specific range capability of the sonar on the John Cabot.
And this is where I'm going to bounce around a
I,
little.
I think I read in the, I believe that I read in the, in maybe the missile entry that it could reach the ocean floor, but I'm not positive, and I'm certainly not an expert.
Does the district have awareness of where the International Ice Patrol aircraft are at any one time?
We don't monitor it in real time, but it's as simple as making a phone call, and that's what we did. I mean, we called, so these C-130 aircraft are controlled by the Coast Guard Atlantic area, and it's simple as the First District Command Center picking up the phone, calling the 24/7 watch floor at Atlantic area, and they'll tell us where those resources are, and that's what we did.
What fixed wing aircraft are available at Air Station Cape Cod?
So fixed wing aircraft's at HC-144. Now I guess it's fair to say that we looked at those aircraft, and they simply just don't have the legs to be able to get out and stay on scene that far offshore. So C-130 was the most logical air asset.
How far is it for a C-130 to get from Elizabeth City to Cape Cod?
I don't know, 1,000 miles so far. I don't know. I'd have to look at a chart.
If the major ocean routes are a great circle from around Cape Cod to Europe, why would the C-130s be stationed in E-City and not closer to those shipping lanes?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I'm not qualified to answer that question. I'm not my role here was in the search and rescue case, not the permanent placement of Coast Guard assets.
Does the District Command Center monitor activity at the Titanic wreck site, or do they have awareness of what's going on there?
Do we monitor what at the Titanic wreck?
What's going on? If some people are diving there?
No.
How about the Andrea Doria? There's been several fatalities there.
Not to my knowledge.
We talked about SAR exercises a little bit. Have there been any search and rescue exercises involving commercial space companies? And I'm thinking about a shuttle Challenger incident where you have to mobilize a lot of ROVs in a hurry. Have you participated in any of those exercises?
To my knowledge, those exercises have happened. I have not participated in any of them, but that's an important point, right? Because I think this case points out very clearly that as the world is changing and as humans push into different spaces, whether that be the ocean floor, into the high latitudes, the Arctic, ecotourism in the Arctic, space travel, we will likely find ourselves in a position to respond where the United States Coast Guard may not have all of the organic assets, but we need to bring a team of people together, a team of experts together to respond. And in this case, it was very clear that no one agency and not even a single country had all the assets that we needed. And frankly, it took a collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. And I truly believe the United States Coast Guard is a great integrator of those capabilities.
There are well-established international procedures for search and rescue. Is that the same for the incident command system? And were there any issues bringing other countries up to speed with our system?
No, we didn't have any issues. No, in short, we didn't have any issues.
I understand you were the liaison for the with the families throughout that week. Was there a whole team, or was that on your shoulders alone?
Well, so it was primarily me. However, there was another captain, Captain Wes Hester, who was in charge of incident management at the 1st Coast Guard District. I believe maybe by the second set of next of kin notifications, he assisted me with those. And in fact, he traveled to St. John's with Admiral Mauger, I believe on Friday, and he spoke to some of the family in person. I was not present for that.
Is there any training that goes along with that position, or an ICS position task book, for example?
There's both. Sure, there is extensive ICS training for different positions, different different levels of ICS training, and there next of kin notifications. There is some training that's part of the maritime search planning course at Yorktown, Virginia. It's you can train, you can read about how you're supposed to do that all day long. Having the heavy task of having to do that multiple times in my career. It's a difficult task. It's a task that I take very, very seriously. It's something you want to get right, and you owe it to the families to get it right. And it's difficult. This case was particularly challenging because they're always difficult. It's much different if you're doing a next of kin notification in person than if you're trying to do it via Microsoft Teams and with people that are all over the globe. But we still put every bit of effort to provide the families with as much information as we possibly could in a timely manner, to set very clear expectations and to tell them what we were thinking next. And then it's incredibly important to get that information to the families before that information is out in the press. And that's a very challenging scenario in today's media environment. And we took it very seriously during this case.
Were there efforts made to get personal effects back to the families, or at least direct them in the right, point them in the right direction?
I wasn't part of those efforts. If there were, that was outside of the scope of the SAR response.
Captain, I understand you've transferred since then, but if you would please pass our appreciation on to your staff, and thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, sir. I will.
Captain Frederick, there might be some confusion about the difference between sector commanders like OCMI zone and a search and rescue zone of responsibility. Can you just briefly delineate between those two?
So my responsibility as sector commander is much smaller. So the first district commander, the SAR zone for RCC Boston encompasses a much larger area. As a sector commander, my area of responsibility essentially, and again, I wasn't the sector commander or captain of the port during the Titan case. I was on the first district staff in the response department. So I was working on behalf of the SAR coordinator. But my area of responsibility now basically extends from the New Hampshire-Massachusetts border to Plymouth, Massachusetts. So I have the Port of Boston, Gloucester, all the Coast Guard units in Massachusetts, minus Cape Cod and the islands.
And to clarify, from your experience, would the Titanic wreck site fall under OCMI or Captain of the Port zone authority?
No, sir.
Captain, Mr. Fawcett has questions for you, sir.
Good day, Captain.
Good afternoon, sir.
So you've mentioned 6,000 meter ROV capability, and the Titanic depth at the ocean floor was less than 4,000 meters. Are you speaking about, like, there's certain different classes of ROVs? Like there's a class that'll go to 3,000 meters and another class that'll go to 6,000 meters?
Yes. So I'm not an expert. I learned just about everything I know about ROV operations during the Titan case. But yes, we were dealing with two different, we were dealing with 3,000 meter ROVs and 6,000 meter ROVs. Obviously, the 3,000 meter ROVs couldn't get us where we needed to go, and we needed to get that 6,000 meter capability on scene.
So Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution was an advisor in the Unified Command?
They were.
So in April 2016, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution used an underwater autonomous vehicle, the Sentry, to descend to the depth of 4,600 meters to recover the SSL Faro's VDR. Was that type of resource, meaning there's a ROV, which has sometimes tethers to the surface, and then an underwater autonomous vehicle that is pre-programmed to, in essence, swim a search pattern to look for debris? Was that kind of resource available?
So specifically, from Woods Hole, no. When we looked at the pelagic ROV, and again, that planning was already taking place right? The wheels were already starting to move. And it takes an immense amount of effort to move that amount of equipment. So all of our focus at the time was on the pelagic Odysseus RV. Now, what I will tell you, though, is that Pelagic was confident that they could rig, I believe it was a cable, to their ROV that would be able to retrieve the pressure capsule if it were intact, and they had a rescue plan. And part of that rescue plan was to retrieve the pressure capsule if it was intact, bring it to a depth where a 3,000 meter or multiple 3,000 meter ROVs could get down and grab a hold of it in a more secure manner and bring it to the surface. So essentially, it was rudimentary, almost a grappling hook plan, but they were very confident in it. They were confident enough that they made alterations to their multi-million-dollar ROV in an effort to effect a rescue if the pressure capsule was found intact. And we believed, given the immense challenges of getting that equipment on scene, the fact that we were already moving in that direction with the pelagic ROV, that was the fastest, most capable piece of equipment that we could get on scene. And again, not only had Pelagic already started moving in that direction, but they had also already worked with, in the past, the vessel of opportunity that brought them to the scene. So, you know, fabricating brackets, welding things to deck, I mean, this takes generally days, if not weeks, and they did it in hours.
So my final question is the Coast Guard's capability for search and rescue operations on the surface has a robust software program to detect the survivability of people in the water. Does the Coast Guard have to rely on the operator of submersibles to help them understand the potential survival time of people that might be on a submersible such as the Titan?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Captain Frederick, is it clear in statute or U.S. federal regulations that the Coast Guard has the responsibility to conduct subsurface search and rescue?
Yes.
Sir, at this
Direct
time,
answer.
I'd like to go to OceanGate Council for any questions.
Mr. Newbauer, could we take a short break?
Yes, the hearing will recess and reconvene at 12:15. Is that enough time?
All right, let's move this ahead. I think there's just a couple of more seconds before they close it out for the day.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Well, what was the question? Oh, I skipped a little bit here. All right, here we go. This guy's so good. I mean, he's clear. He's been doing this for over 30 years. He's incredibly well put together. There's no nervousness. There's no equivocation in his answers. He gives very, very direct answers to the questions he's asked. There's not a lot really to comment on this guy because he's just class. Dude is just top notch.
The hearing is now back in session. And Captain, before we close with your testimony, I want to make one additional clarification to the record because it's a really important point from the Marine Board's perspective. When we talked about the master of the polar prints answers to the Marine Board's questions.
It was the master of the polar prints. It was the another name for captain. It was the captain of the polar prints that gave that in hindsight answer. All right, it's okay.
I want to clarify that those were provided to the board on 16 October 2023. So that was months after the incident, and the statement does start from the master that it was in hindsight that he recalled a slight vibration on the vessel. The master of the polar prints was not associated with OceanGate employees and others who were on the polar prints in June of 2023.
Human Ham Cubes is master the Canadian equivalent of a captain. It's just the term that they use in the industry. Captain or master, they're used interchangeably all around the world. I use master more than captain because captain, to me, sort of kind of intent gives an impression of military. But most of the people, most of the lawyers, maritime lawyers and things I work with will say master instead of captain. It's just they're interchangeable.
At this time, are there any final questions for Captain Frederick from the board or OceanGate?
No questions. And we just wanted to say, Captain Frederick, thank you very much for the work that you and your team did last summer and more broadly, everything that you do. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Captain Frederick, is there anything that the Marine Board has not asked you that you think would be valuable to this investigation?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Captain, I want to thank you again for taking the time out to provide this valuable information to the Marine Board. You are now released as a witness to this formal hearing. If I later determine that this board needs additional information from you, I will contact you through your counsel. If you have questions or additional information that would be valuable in the future, please contact our recorder, Lieutenant Kelly Steele. At this time, the Marine Board will recess for lunch and reconvene at 1:30.
Oh no, we will reconvene tomorrow at the same bat time, same bat channel, 10 p.m. my time, which is 9 a.m. Eastern. And then we will wrap it up. Tomorrow will be the final day of the Coast Guard hearings. Gosh, I'm gonna miss it. We've been doing it so long. I had a couple of comments that I starred here just to make some comments on. Where'd we go? Corn Pope said this has been your best series, in my opinion. The U.S. Coast Guard hearing videos. This has been so interesting, and I'm gonna miss it. And again, this is not how this started out. This started out with me apologizing for how boring it was going to be. It was going to be interesting to me, and I just thought we would watch it so that people could see how the Coast Guard conducts their hearings. It's not often we get to see this on such an open scale. But boy, yeah, no idea we would walk down some of the paths we walked down during this. It's been incredibly interesting. And so I'm glad it didn't suck. It's kind of basically what I'm saying. And Josh Chandler says Master and Commander. Well, actually, back in the time of the Master and Commander series and movie, the Master and the Captain were actually different. But this isn't a commercial and or naval history hour. But yeah, back then they were actually different. The Master and the Captain were different, but now today they're used interchangeably. So, all right, that is all I had for today. So I guess we will wrap this up and send you out into the wild. And we'll be back tomorrow. How does that sound? For the final day. What we're going to do is after we wrap up the hearing tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, we will be doing our run up to Sarah Boone. Sarah Boone's trial is scheduled to start Monday, October 7th. She's the suitcase murderer, the infamous suitcase murderer suspect, allegedly. So Wednesday, we'll at some point, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, between those 3 days, we'll be trying to watch the most recent hearing, the arrest videos, and the interrogation videos. And on Monday, they're likely to have a jury selection, but if they do jury, which they will have jury selection. It's likely that they will not stream it because it's boring. But if they do stream it, we'll watch it. If they don't stream it, we'll do a relaxing stream of the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney playthrough part 3. We ended part 2 in the middle of a trial. We have to solve the murder. So we'll have a chill stream on Monday with Ace Wright, with Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney if the jury selection is not streamed. And then once the Sarah Boone trial commences, we will follow that through all the way to the end, much the same way as we've done here. We'll do the morning session, and then the next day we'll do the afternoon and the morning, and we'll keep doing that for as long as the trial goes. All right, thanks guys for being here. You guys are awesome, and we kept the emotional support potato pig dog cam streak alive for day 24 in a row. Let's see if we can make tomorrow day 25. Mods, thank you very much for being here and doing your moddy best and all the awesome stuff that you do. And thank you, chat. Thank you, chat, for being here, for the super chats, the gifted memberships, the purchase memberships, everything that got the emotional support potato pig dog cams unlocked, and the rest of you, chat, just hanging out, taking care, talking to each other, doing the super awesome stuff. Thank you so much for keeping us company. You guys are awesome. We will see you tomorrow. I know I've said awesome like 587 times here, but it's damn true. You guys are superb. We will see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern, for the final day of these hearings. Until then, make sure you enjoy your legal vices.